Steve, you are set to begin.
Good afternoon, everybody, to all the commissioners, as well as all of the citizens viewing us on YouTube or other media. I call this meeting of the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission to order. The Zoom webinar is being live streamed on Facebook and YouTube. For anyone in the public watching who would prefer to watch via a different platform than they are currently using, please visit our social media at Redistricting MI to find the link for either viewing on YouTube. Our live stream today includes closed captioning. We have ASL interpretation available for this meeting. If you are a member of the public watching who would like easier viewing options for ASL interpreter on your screen, please email us at redistricting@michigan.gov and we will provide you with additional viewing options. Similarly, members of the public who would like to access translation services during the webinar can email us at redistricting@michigan.gov for details on how to access language translation services available for this meeting. Translation services are available for both Spanish and Arabic. Please email us and we will provide you with a unique link and call-in information. This meeting is being recorded and will be available at redistrictingmichigan.org for viewing at a later date. This meeting is also being transcribed, and those transcriptions will be made available and posted on redistrictingmichigan.org along with written public comment submissions. Members of the media who may have questions before, during, or after the meeting should direct those questions to Tracy Weimer, Media Relations Director at the Department of State. Members of the media should have her contact information. For purposes of the public watching and the public record, I will turn to the Department of State to take note of the commissioners present. Sally, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, please unmute and say present when I call your name. Anthony Eid.
Present.
Brittany Kellum.
Present.
Cynthia Orton.
Present.
Doug Clark.
Present.
Dustin Witches. Aaron Wagner.
Present.
Janice Villette.
Present.
Juanita Curry. MC Rothhorn.
Present.
Rebecca Zatella.
Present.
Rhonda Lang.
Present.
Richard Weiss. Richard, we can't hear you.
Present. You hear me now?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, cool.
And Steve Blatt.
Present. So we have two commissioners not present with us today. We have to have 9 for a quorum, and we have 11, so we have a quorum. Okay, we have an agenda which was provided to us prior to our opening. Are there any additions, deletions, or comments by anybody on the agenda? Hearing none, I would consider a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded that the agenda be approved as presented. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, the same sign. It is adopted. Next, we have the review and approval of the minutes
Good.
from December 1st, 2020. Since I usually have a correction, I don't have any corrections. It looks pretty good to me. Anybody have any corrections, additions, or deletions for the minutes of December 1st, 2020? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as
Sally might.
presented. MC?
No, I think Sally might. That's all.
Apologies to interrupt. I just wanted to note for the record that Commissioner Curry has joined via phone. So while the public can't see her, she is now part of the meeting.
So that means we now have 12 present. So we still have a quorum. Nobody else is left. Good. Okay, now motion to approve the minutes. MC. Second,
second.
Aaron. And all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, the same sign. The minutes are approved. We do have public comment today, I am informed, so we'll move on to that. A few notes about the public comment for those of you joining us for the first time. Because this is a virtual meeting, members of the public have to sign up in advance to address the commission. Staff at the Department of State will unmute each member of the public for up to 2 minutes on a first come, first served basis. This means that members of the public will be called on in the order in which they signed up to address the commission in the event that there is more than one. To those members of the public participating in public comment, please note, you will have no more than 2 minutes to address this commission this afternoon. You can also submit your thoughts to the commission and the public by emailing redistricting@michigan.gov. The Department of State will provide your written thoughts to the commission by indicating in that email that you would like to submit your written comments as public comment. It will be included in the online meeting archive for the commission. Public comment sign-up links are also posted on Redistricting Michigan social media pages on Facebook and Twitter @RedistrictingMI. Now, I would like to recognize Sally Marsh, Michigan Department of State Director of Special Projects, who will call on members of the public to address the commission. Sally.
Good afternoon. Oh, I'm hearing a little feedback. Okay. So individuals who signed up and indicated that they would like to provide live public commentary will now be allowed to do so. Just a few technical notes. After I call your name, your screen will change and you will rejoin the meeting as a presenter. Then you will need to turn your sound and your video on before you make live public comments. I believe the individual addressing us today might be using their phone for a microphone, so we may have to troubleshoot that if needed. So we'll try to work with you. We only have one participant in public comment today, so we'll see if this works with your audio currently, and if not, we'll come back to you in a minute. So first in line, and our only public comment participant in line is Katie Fahey. Just allow us a moment to promote you and allow you to speak. Thanks.
Yeah, there would be questions also. Why can't they just say yes? So, see, you wouldn't, right?
Okay, can you guys hear me? Yes.
You will have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Hello, commissioners. I'm very grateful for your time. My name is Katie Fahey, and also thank you for your service. I called in today because I created the Michigan Ballot Question Committee, Voters Not Politicians, and led the effort to create the commission that you all serve on today. Meaning James Lancaster, one of the considerations for legal counsel, directly reported to me as our legal counsel. I trust your judgment, so I'm not here to advocate for one candidate over another, but I did want you guys to know that if you're looking for somebody who's worked with him before on this direct issue, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'd also be happy to explain how we took really seriously balance of making sure you have constitutional expertise and public perception around partisanship and what you can do around hiring related to that. Overall, the best advice I could give is really look at somebody who knows the Michigan Constitution well. And as somebody who helped study independent commission success for the last 4 years, I'd also advocate that you think about somebody who can really help you navigate the order that the criteria has been placed in for how the lines need to be drawn and what the considerations should be from the commission. Your legal counsel should be thinking about this constantly and at 3 in the morning thinking about how do we best make sure you both serve the Michigan Constitution as well as the commission. Thank you for your time. I know that being in this position takes a lot of leadership and thoughtfulness and strategy. And I hope that you guys aren't afraid to take that and to take the balances of these considerations seriously. I've been so proud to watch so far. So thank you again for your service.
Thank you, Ms. Fahey, for addressing the commission. We take your comments as we take all comments from the public seriously, and we'll consider those in our deliberations. This concludes the public comment for this afternoon. At this time, we have a webinar presentation on Michigan demographics and the census. The panel this afternoon will be Tom Ivacko. Is that correct, Tom?
That is correct. Thank you.
Great. Lisa Neidert.
That's correct.
Yeah, 2 for 2. So this one will be wrong. Noah Durst.
That's correct as well. Thank you.
And Eric Guthrie.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Somebody snuck in a normal name. I guess they're all normal names, aren't they? All right. The moderator is Tom. I will turn it over, Tom, to you and take it away.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Chairman Lett. And hello again, commissioners. It's an honor to be back with you today. You've been a busy group and have made significant progress since I was last with you back in September. And it has been great to see this commission in action. In just a few minutes, we will turn this over to today's presenters, but I wanted to take just a couple minutes to briefly address the importance of what you are doing. I think it's easy to lose track of that as you get into the details of your work. When I spoke with you last time, I noted that democracy itself has been in decline across our country and around the world. There's a lot of research about these issues. And one of the more comprehensive studies is known as the Democracy Index. It's an ongoing study that ranks the health of democracies around the world using 60 different indicators or measures. That study has shown declining health of democracy here in the United States for a number of years and for a number of reasons, with some of our biggest challenges in the categories of political participation and political culture. That study finds that we no longer have a full democracy in the United States. They list us now as a flawed democracy, and it's really quite concerning. But there are lots of efforts underway to improve our democracy and many reasons for optimism. And from my perspective, the 13 of you as Michigan's Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission provide one of the most hopeful developments happening today, certainly in Michigan, but also on a national scale. And this is why I've been particularly encouraged to watch you come together. 13 strangers from across the political spectrum with a common goal to serve the people of Michigan. I personally am grateful for your efforts to work together and to provide an example for how we can strengthen our democracy going forward. Your efforts touch directly on those aspects of political participation and political culture where the United States is lagging today. You've really done a great job so far, and I'm confident that you'll continue to do so over the coming year. The work is going to be challenging and will require compromise. But if you hit any particularly rough patches, I hope you'll remember that this is a high calling that you each have answered. And by respecting each other and working as a team, you can provide a remarkably important lesson and a source of hope and inspiration for the rest of us. And you're already doing that. Finally, I'd also like to just quickly note the terrific job that has been done to support your work by the team at the Secretary of State's office, including Secretary Benson and our good friends, Sally Marsh, Mike Brady, Sarah Reinhardt, and the rest of that team at the Department of State. Really well done. Okay, with that, I'll make quick introductions of our panelists and then turn it over to them to give us an overview of issues related to the census and the demographics of Michigan. We have three distinguished presenters who are experts on these and related issues today. Each will speak for roughly 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll just have an open Q&A for the balance of our time. As with our previous panels, I know that today's speakers would be happy to provide additional help to the Commission after today's session. And of course, that continues to be the case for us at the University of Michigan as well. So if you commissioners have further questions or would like additional help after today's session, please do not hesitate to reach out to any of us. So our presenters today include Lisa Neidert from the Population Studies Center at the University of Michigan's Institute for Social Research. Lisa has a PhD in sociology and demography from the University of Texas. She teaches at U of M and served as the data archivist for the Population Studies Center. She's an expert on the US Census. She'll present today on Michigan demographics and the census, including the expected timeline for when you'll get those data, which unfortunately is going to be delayed due to the pandemic and other issues. So that's an important thing for you to keep in mind. After Lisa, we'll hear from Noah Durst, Assistant Professor of Urban and Regional Planning at Michigan State University's School of Planning, Design, and Construction. Noah has a PhD in public policy, also from the University of Texas. Hook 'em horns today. He has expertise in a number of areas, including housing and housing markets, land use regulation, local governance, and residential segregation. He'll present today on Michigan demographics and on the census data that you'll be using, including census geographies, so that you understand different levels of the data. And then finally, we'll hear from Eric Guthrie, the state demographer for the state of Michigan, which, if I can say, it just sounds like an awesome job. Eric has a PhD in sociology from South Dakota State University. He's an expert in the census and Michigan demographics. He advises many different stakeholders about demographics in Michigan, teaches sociology at Kellogg Community College, and serves as the state of Michigan's liaison to the US Census Bureau. He'll present today on the census and other sources of data that you can tap into, also on changes in Michigan's population over time, and regional variations in Michigan's population and industry characteristics. So with those brief introductions, I will turn it over now to Lisa, who will start us off. Lisa, take it away.
All righty. I'm gonna share a screen. So I'm so glad to be here, and you all are so lucky to be part of this inaugural redistricting commission. So I'm going to talk about the census and redistricting and not too much about demography. I'm going to let my partners do that. So very first, a little bit of census history is that it's in the Constitution, and it tells you who's counted and what its purpose is to basically reapportion the population. And it's to be taken every 10 years so that power among states could be redistributed based on population. And rapidly growing states would get more seats in the House, and states that were slow growing would eventually lose power. And this has happened. Back in 1900, California only had 8 seats, and by now they have 53. Florida started out with 3 back in 1900, and now they have 27. On the other hand, you can take a state like Iowa, actually had 11 seats back in 1900, and they're down to 4. And we hit our peak at 19, and we're down to 14, and we're likely to lose a seat. In this, after the 2020 census. So congressional reapportionment has happened every year since 1790, except for 1920. You can see this 1900, 1910, 1930. And we did not reapportion seats among Congress in that year. And it was because that was the first year that the urban population was larger than the rural population. The rural states didn't really want to give up the power to these new urban populations, particularly the big cities. They saw them as filled with foreigners, Catholics, an emerging Black population. And so that has the only blemish on reapportionment. So that's mostly been a success, but redistricting hasn't always been. And the issue for most of the 20th century was not gerrymandering, which is what everyone has heard of. It was a term called malapportionment. And what that meant was that states were not redistricting after the census, like after the census of 1900. Most states did not redistrict. And so what would end up happening was that the rural districts were representing far fewer people than the urban districts. And so here's an example. Tennessee was the poster child for the Supreme Court case that put an end to this. And they had not redistricted their local geography since 1901. And so you basically have this imbalance that the urban areas had very little representation and the rural areas had more. Now, they weren't the only state that did that. Another thing that states did was have a county unit system so that every county got a state senator or a state representative. And so Wayne County in Michigan, that's 1.75 million, would have the same representation as Keenewa County up in the UP, that's under 5,000 in population. Another scenario, states would redistrict, but they had these crazy rules of how they redistricted. So California, for their state senate, said you cannot divide up a county and you can't combine more than 3 counties. So LA County with 6 million people had the same representation as these 3 small counties that didn't even sum to 20,000. Now, if Michigan had used those rules, you'd have Wayne County and these 3 western UP counties, Ontonagon, Baraga, and Iron, or else these eastern UP counties, they would all have the same power. And I'll just show you, here is an example. Michigan never used this system, but here is an example of our congressional districts. Back in 1960, we had a congressional district that had 800,000, and our smallest one was 117,000. So really, really out of whack. And that is such a blunt tool. You don't have to use computers or anything to create these discrepancies. So luckily, this was rectified after this 1962 Supreme Court case called Baker versus Carr. And the consequences of it and some subsequent cases was that congressional districts have to be exactly the same size after the census, you can have a difference of 1 or 2 if you can't divide, if it comes out with a remainder. And the state legislative districts have a little bit more leeway, but they pretty much have to be the same size as well. And so here's what Michigan looked like after the 2010 census. You can see that they actually all had the same size within 1. So some of them are 75, some are 74. I've got them sorted by their current population size. And so you can see after 10 years or 9 years, 2 West Michigan districts have grown by over 40,000. And then Rashida Tlaib's district in Detroit has lost 33,000, and Kildee is up in the Thumb area, and that's also lost 30,000 or so. So you can see the gap between the smallest and largest districts is about 75,000. So if you weren't redistricting, at some point you get out of whack. I have these guys in red because they did not run in 2020. So they've been replaced. But so that's not a terrible discrepancy, but after another 10 years, it would start mattering. And if you're in a fast growing state like Texas, their slowest district grew by 14,000 and their fastest grew by over 250,000. So you can see that some states are really out of whack and really need to be redistricted every 10 years, but so does Michigan. So let's turn to the 2020 census. It was a short form census. It doesn't ask very much, and it has 2 forms. Most of us filled out the household form because we live in houses or apartments. But if you lived in a dorm, you would have been in a group quarters, and the other group quarters populations are prisoners, military barracks, and nursing homes, and sometimes redistricting commissions across different states care about prisoners. I want to make a little diversion to the Hispanic origin race question. The Census Bureau actually wanted to change the way they ask this. Instead of asking Hispanic origin and then race, they really just said, let's just let people describe what category describes you. And so I would choose white, and then if I wanted to, I could choose my background. They added, with request from this population, a Middle East or North African choice called MENA. And that's relevant for Southeastern Michigan. We actually have this population. And so they're no longer stuck choosing, well, am I white? Am I black? What am I? They actually had a category. But the Office of Management and Budget, which is the overseer of the federal statistical system, did not approve this change. So for the 2010 census, they first asked, are you Hispanic or Latino? And then they ask your race, and it has all those same race categories, but no MENA category. Not to worry, there are other sources of data that will allow you to identify that population in Michigan decently well. And when you go on your listening tours, the folks that are in that community could tell you, well, these are the places or the cities we live in. And so you will be able to satisfy that population, even though you won't really have the data. The redistricting data will be counts down to all kinds of geographies. I'll let Noah and Eric discuss in more detail. Not very many variables. You get age, less than 18, really you get the total and 18 plus, but then you can convert to less than 18, Hispanic origin populations, race, and then the group quarters population, identifying what kind of group quarters. And these are counts, and they go down to little tiny counts, so you can, or not counts, but small geographies, so you can build your own districts. And your expert that you have helping you do that will be able to manipulate the data. You don't have to know how to do this. Timeline, normally there's a statutory deadline that the Census Bureau will release the data by December 31st of the year the census came out, and that's for apportionment. And then every state learns, oh, I'm going to get 2 extra seats, or I'm losing a seat. And then the redistricting data, where it's all this detail down to small geographies, comes several months later. And in 2010, they released it on a weekly basis, with the last states getting it by April 1st, 2021. But the Census Bureau, because of COVID, their schedule was completely thrown off. They've indicated that they're not going to meet this December 31st deadline. They gave an approximate deadline for the apportionment data of January 26th, but then I saw at a Census Oversight Committee that maybe it's December or January 23rd instead of January 26th. So we don't quite know, but the April 1st deadline is going to be missed if this one is missed. Well, what can you do? There's an alternative. You're expert. Y'all can practice by using the 2010 redistricting data. And as you can see, Michigan hasn't really grown a whole lot. And there hasn't been dramatic shifts in population across the state. So this will work pretty well for Michigan. It won't work so well for Texas. But even in Michigan, the populations will have shifted. There'll be more Asians in an area than there were 10 years ago. And you won't be able to see that till you get the right data. And again, Eric might want to touch on this, but there's a correct version of these data you'll want to use, but this, you all don't have to worry about this as much as your map maker will be more aware of that. And that's all I have to say. I will say that there's no one variable that will help you all with what you're trying to do. You can't just plug one thing in and it'll divide us up into 13 congressional districts or the state legislative districts. There's lots and lots and lots of variables, and you can certainly get a sense of Michigan geography. Here's the kind of thing that state of Michigan is using for emergency preparedness reasons, or when COVID first started. Here's what we're using. Washington Post had the 6 political states of Michigan. None of those work. We need 13 divisions. So that's it.
Thank you, Lisa. That was a terrific overview. So next we'll turn to Professor Noah Durst. Noah, take it away.
Thank you. Let me get my presentation loaded here. And I'll be fairly brief, be below the 15 or 10 to 15 minutes allocated. I'll talk to you today about the census geography. So these are the spatial units that census data are reported in. And then I'll give you a brief introduction to how we can use those data to look at trends, population trends. And then Eric will really pick up where I leave off and look at some other resources, but also other ways to look at census data.
Noah, just really quickly, sorry to interrupt, but the screen share we see is the presenter mode. So I don't know if you want to share a different part of your screen before you get going.
Interesting. I don't know why that would be the case. Let me try that just one more time and see if it works now.
Okay.
If you have 2 monitors, potentially, you can just screen share from now to the other monitor screen, and that normally works.
Okay, let me try that one last time then. Thanks for your patience. And I think that will work. Okay, let me share that screen and then, there we go. Does that work? Perfect.
Great.
Okay, thanks for your patience with the technology. Okay, so I would like to start by talking about the geography itself. So the nation is divided into 50 states and a few other territories. And the census is an effort to go out and interview residents in every household in the entirety of the nation. So once that data is collected, cleaned, and prepared, we can then look at it in space and see where the distribution of population is, and we can choose the scale that we want to look at. So there are some natural ways to look at those data spatially. And one is to look at states. But you can subdivide states into a series of local government entities. So in the case of Michigan, we can divide up the state into counties. And we can look at how trends have changed over time from county to county. And in the process of redistricting, we can actually group entire counties together. So we can use counties as a spatial unit to look at population trends and then actually to build districts. But there are other ways to subdivide the state into local governments, and one would be townships. So Michigan, the Midwest and the Northeast have townships or towns that are also local government entities that cover the vast majority of the state. So we could also subdivide the state up into local governments and visualize data that way. And we could also do the same for what the Census Bureau calls places. And one example of places are cities. There are other places that the Census Bureau documents that are unincorporated communities. So these more like neighborhoods or communities that we all know by name, but they don't have a local government there. Near where I live, Okemos would be one example. It's a place that we recognize and refer to, but it's not actually a local government. It's Meridian Township who's responsible for the provision of services. So we can then narrow down further. The way the Census Bureau does that goes from the state level often to counties, and then counties are subdivided into another geography, and the entirety of that county is then divided up into statistical geographical units. So the next step are tracts. So a census tract, depending on where you're located, could be a very, very large entity, geographic entity. If you're in a rural area, your census tract could be possibly the entirety of a county, or a large portion of your county might be one tract. The Census Bureau aims to have a fairly standard population distribution in a county, on the order of 4,000 to 5,000 people. But it depends on the specific location and how that population is distributed. Tracts you might think of in an urbanized area as being a large neighborhood, maybe a part of a city, possibly a district within a city, like a city council district might be comparable in size to a tract. Tracts are then divided up into what are called block groups. And a block group is literally, in many cases, a group of blocks. But they add together, block groups, when added together, form tracts. And then tracts, when added together, form counties. So in this way, we can take census data from the decennial census and look at it in increasingly smaller scales to get a very precise idea of who lives where, in what neighborhood. And we can even go to a smaller scale, the block unit. So blocks are the smallest geography delineated by the Census Bureau. In urbanized areas, in central cities, they literally are city blocks. And they are often in denser areas. They are rectangles or squares that are really delineating the boundary of the block itself. And the way this is done for the Census Bureau, they use big data. They can identify where roads, streams, and other dividing lines are, and then produce estimates of where these blocks are located. So within each block is a neighborhood or a small part of a neighborhood. And here I have to show this neighborhood that's in Ingham County, Michigan, with satellite imagery to see down below and see what's actually there, which is a city block with about a dozen or so houses. So those are the houses that in this case are interviewed during the census taking process. And we don't actually in the census data products see those individual households. All that data is aggregated at the block level. So the block is really the smallest unit or geographic unit that can be used to visualize spatially results from the decennial census. So in the process of redrawing districts, there are various spatial scales that can be considered. And when necessary, you can go all the way down to literally the block level to redraw a district and apportion some seats or to redistrict some neighborhoods into one district and others into another. And that can be done at a very spatially precise scale, really the level of a neighborhood. In order to describe how we might anticipate changes in redistricting, as Lisa touched on, we can try and do that a little bit spatially. So I'm going to transition to a map of the geography of the state and population per square mile. So this is population density. And I just want to clarify that I'm using data from 2018, but there wasn't a decennial census in 2018. The decennial census happens every decade. So I'm using estimates from a different statistical data product called the American Community Survey. And this is a sample, a random sample of residents in each neighborhood. And I'm doing this at the tract level, and that American Community Survey data can go down to the block group level, but not the block. The decennial census is the only way to get block level estimates of population. So here I'm presenting population per square mile using data from the American Community Survey published in 2018. You can see where concentrations of population are located. The vast majority of the population is located in the Detroit metro area, as you can see in the southeastern side of the map. There are also large pockets of population around the other major cities, around Grand Rapids, Lansing, Flint, Kalamazoo. And then you can see the suburbs as well, shown in a lighter red and a pink along the fringes of those denser areas. And then the vast majority of the state is rural, has very low population density. So something to think about as you consider the process of redistricting is that if we're required to have districts with equal sizes, that means some districts in rural areas, the districts that cover rural areas, are going to be much larger than those in urban areas. And that's driven by the location of population across the state. So in the process of redrawing districts, those areas shown in dark red on the map will be required to have smaller geographies. The district itself will appear smaller on the map, but that's driven by the need to balance the population, and it's in recognition of the fact that the population of the state isn't distributed equally across space. We can get a sense of the way in which these population trends might be changing by comparing the decennial census data from 2010 to these estimates from 2018 that I described. And just recall that these 2018 data are estimates, and they are accompanied by a sampling error. So whenever you do a random sample, there's a little bit of variation depending on the random sample that happens to be interviewed in that given year. So these are pretty good estimates. Given we're working with counties, we aggregate all that data up to the county level. Feel pretty confident that these population trends are a realistic estimate of what we'll anticipate seeing once we have the decennial census data for 2020, but they are, again, still estimates. And I've aggregated at the county level so we can see on the broad scale how these trends vary or might have varied over time. And what do we see when we do that? There are two primary counties that we're estimating at this point will have lost substantial numbers of residents over that 8 to 10 year time period. Mainly, we're talking about Wayne County, where Detroit is, and then we're talking about Flint or Genesee County. Those are the two counties in the state that lost, or we've estimated they will have lost 10,000 or more residents over that 8 to 10 year period. The suburbs around the Detroit area appear to have gained 10,000 or more residents over that same time period, as have Ottawa and Kent County, and then Kalamazoo counties as well. You can also see, those are the counties that have the largest swings in population, or the estimated swings in population. Those are also our most urbanized counties in the state. So that would be where we would anticipate to see a larger change. If 1% of the population moves in or out of a specific county in a very large county, that could mean 10,000 people have moved. But you can also see throughout much of the rest of the state, in the more rural areas, we also see a fairly noticeable decline in population, just to a lesser degree, where many of the counties in the Upper Peninsula and elsewhere throughout rural parts of the state have lost an estimated 1,000 or more residents over that 8 to 10 year time period. Again, these are estimates. They're likely to be fairly accurate, at least on the whole. And they give us a sense of where population trends have changed over time, but also how we might anticipate seeing districts be redrawn. We might anticipate rural districts being spatially larger than they were current or previously, just simply due to the change in the number of people living in rural parts of the state. That's all I have for you. Fairly brief overview. I'm happy to ask any or answer any additional questions later on in the presentation.
Thank you, Noah. Very informative overview. Next, our last presenter today is Eric Guthrie, again, demographer for the state of Michigan. Eric, when we're done here, I want to hear all about your job. But for now, if you just give us an overview of Michigan demographics and the census.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just share my screen here and make sure that everybody is on the right screen. Share. Okay, everybody should see my presentation now. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for having me here today, and also thank you for your service on this commission. I think that we all agree that it is vital and very important, so thank you very much. I'm going to talk about a few topics today. I'm going to start off just by talking about my role as a state demographer and what other state resources I think might be of value to you. I'm going to talk about Michigan population change, the dynamics of that population change from a demographic perspective, regional, ethnic, and race dispersion in the state, housing tenure, and large industry distribution and economic regions and how those can be thought about in the state. So first of all, in terms of my position, I am, again, the state demographer. I'm the liaison to the Census Bureau for all of the demographic programs. That's part of the reason you see all of these logos on my background. I work in labor market information, which is part of DTMB. I also serve on the federal and state cooperative for population estimates. I'm the lead for the state data center, Census Data Center. And I spend my time as a civil servant for the state of Michigan, advising state leaders, businesses, nonprofits, and generally just anybody that needs assistance understanding how the population is distributed, changing, and what we can look forward to in the future. So this type of work is my passion, and I've been doing it for a while. In terms of state resources, I did mention that I work in the Bureau of Labor Market Information and Strategic Initiatives. I do the demographic work along with a couple other staff members. Everybody else in the Bureau are economists, and if you're looking for economic data or labor market information, our Bureau can certainly help you with that. In addition, other DTMB resources that might be of use to you, the Center for Shared Solutions does all of the state's geographic work in terms of maintaining the boundaries for all of our various important locations. And you're going to get a presentation later on, not today, but later on from somebody from CSS that's probably going to go over all of the things that they're going to be able to provide to you. Additionally, the Treasury Department would have tax information and state financial information. I'm not sure what you guys, how useful that would be to you. That'd be mostly revenue type information. The Michigan Department of Education has an extensive amount of information on the youth population. And those data are generally publicly available through SEPSI. Also, they can do custom data requests for you as well. The Department of Health and Human Services is going to have a lot of information for you on vital statistics, birth deaths, those changes over time. Also under the umbrella of Health and Human Services is the Office and the Commission of Aging. The aging population is very important in our state. And they're going to be able to provide you with a lot of information on that as well. Lisa mentioned earlier the importance in some states in redistricting of prisons. I don't believe there are necessarily the same requirements in Michigan as other states have, but if you were looking for information on the prison populations, the Department of Corrections might be able to assist you with those types of data as well. So there are a lot of state resources available to the commission in addition to those that are going to be coming out from the Census Bureau in the redistricting file. I just want to touch real quickly on what you're going to get from the redistricting file. The redistricting file is going to be a differentially private file at this point. At least what the Bureau has made public so far is there's not going to be a correct file or anything other than that differentially private file. So my suggestion is to make sure that you have a person competent in demographic analysis to help you understand what the effects of that process are going to be on the data, because there is going to be noise infused into the data you receive to do redistricting. Okay, moving along to Michigan population change. We have done some projections out of my office for Michigan's population. In the first quadrant of this graph, we can see this dotted dark green line, Michigan's population is projected to increase. The reason that we are projecting population increases is because of anticipated migration to the state. These projections were completed prior to the COVID pandemic, so obviously some things are up in the air at this point, but this is where we saw Michigan's population going in the most recent iteration of our projections. This light green line is really here to emphasize the importance of migration in the state. Were Michigan to achieve a net zero migration, meaning we had as many people leave as enter the state in a given year, or another way to think about that, if we had no people leave the state, Michigan's population would begin to decline. Right? And that is primarily because of the change in the births and deaths that we are seeing in the state. Michigan, especially as our population is beginning to age, and our baby boomers are starting to enter the older age groups, we are going to see deaths beginning to increase as the baby boom generation begins to experience the effects of mortality. And our birth rates have come down to a historic low. And given the impacts of COVID, we're not expecting to see increases in that fertility rate. So we are anticipating a natural decline in the population because of deaths exceeding births around the year 2030, maybe a little bit sooner. So in terms of our population growth, it is going to be almost entirely dependent upon net migration, which just background in most recent years has been made positive because of our international migration. Our domestic migration has still been negative for some time. Now, to kind of help you understand how these three things come together in terms of the population growing, I need to show you how the population structure has changed over time. This is a population pyramid meant to show the population structure. I'm going to start in 1990. You can see this big bulge here in the 25 to 45 year range, which represents the baby boom population. As we set this graphic in motion, we can see that, whoops, there we go, that the baby boom population is beginning to, starting in around 2010, cross that 65-year mark, the traditional time where we think about people retiring, and they are going to be beginning to exit the labor force. One thing that is hard to see without an overlay of the national population structure is that this part of our population is more narrow than the national population, meaning we have fewer people around 35 to 55 in our population. We have more people in this 55 to 75 age group and fewer people in this sort of below 20 age group. And we can see with this shape here, this funnel, that is a graphic representation of declining birth rates in the state. So that is sort of a visual representation of that graphic that I showed you before as we transition into a period of natural decline, which should emphasize how important migration is going to be in future population increases in the state. So it's important to, obviously, for this group to understand some of the regional differences and distributions of Michigan's population. A really important aspect of that is the racial and ethnic distribution of the population. We can see from this table that obviously the white non-Hispanic population is the largest single group in our state, constituting over 74% of the population. The next largest group would be our Black or African American population, constituting well over 13% of the population. Our Hispanic group in the state constitutes about 5% of the population. One thing to note about this particular way that I have aggregated the race and ethnic data is the Hispanic origin was created as a pseudo, it was treated here as a pseudo race category, much the way that the Census Bureau was anticipating asking the 2020 data. The reason I do it like this generally is because Hispanic persons can be of any race. So if I would have put them in the other race categories, if you would have summed up these data, they would have been greater than the total population of the state by the Hispanic population. So this is just a way for us to see that distribution. There are other ways to look at it though, and if anybody's interested, we could certainly talk about that at greater length. These are some maps that I have developed to kind of show how these groups, any group over 5% is distributed across the state. We can see that the white non-Hispanic group covers the state pretty extensively. We can see, however, when we look in our more deeply heavily populated urban cores, they tend to have lower concentrations. When we move to our Black or African American population, we can see that they are more lightly spread across the state, but there are some significant areas where, well, we do not generally see Black or African American populations. And as we move over to our Hispanic or Latino or Latinx population, we can see that there are some concentrations, but they are more evenly spread across the state than would be, say, for example, our African American populations. I do want to zoom in on these two groups maps just to show you that there are some significant concentrations that we can see in areas across the state as well. They're hard to see in that larger view. So, housing tenure is a very important aspect to think about when we think about how different groups think differently and experience Michigan in different ways. I'm going to start off with talking about occupied housing units. So that is this map here. We can see that in the southern part of the state, generally the majority of the housing units are in this upper end with high occupancy. And if we think about the state's population, if we draw a line roughly around here, we can say about 80% of the population is below that line. We have about 17% in this sort of northern lower peninsula area, and about 3% of the state's population in the UP. Now, this is just one variable, and if we move over to this map, that one variable is represented on this part of the graphic, so still in green, separated into three groups, 0 to 62%, 62 to 84, and then 84 to 100. And then I introduced another variable, the percent that is owner occupied. So if a unit is occupied, it's either occupied by an owner or a renter. And I only have one more slide, so I know I'm getting a little over time, so I'll be brief. But just when we look at the lower part of the state versus the northern part of the state, we can see that this lower part of the state kind of exists in this area. So we still have a relatively high amount of percent occupied and still a higher percent of owner occupied. When we move into this upper part of the state, we see that we move down, we have a lower percentage of occupied units, but we still have similar proportionalities of those occupied units being owner occupied, right? So one would think that if we have fewer units that are owner occupied, then we have more units that are renter occupied, right? Well, there is another way to look at these data, and I took away the two variable map, and I'm going back to one variable map. This is still the same map with occupied housing units, but this map shows units that are vacant for seasonal or recreational use. So think second homes, vacation homes, lake houses, and things like that. And we can see that a lot of the vacant housing in the same area is actually vacant for seasonal or recreational use. So it wouldn't be available for rent or something like that. I just want to kind of go back and forth real quick so you can see how these regions mirror each other and see that they're pretty much the same areas. So where we don't have a lot of occupied housing units in the state, we tend to see a lot of seasonal or recreational use for those housings. In terms of the economic regions, we have a lot of economic regions in the state depending upon industries and ways to conceptualize them. In terms of dominant industries in particular areas, we can see that manufacturing is heavy in large portions of the state. Healthcare and social assistance is spread out more evenly, though with some higher concentrations in the northern part of the state. I've been talking to some people about this particular representation, and what might be more important would be a representation of healthcare workers per resident, because this part of the state has a lot of older residents that are going to be in need of healthcare workers as they move further and further into the older age groups. We can see that the northern part of the state is really heavily involved in the leisure and hospitality industry. Some economic regions that are already established and being used by various entities. Prosperity regions are used by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, or MADC. Michigan Works, which is the labor force development area of Michigan government, has a variety of regions of their own. And also Michigan Council of Government regions are very important to the state. These are things like the Southeast Michigan Council of Government, SEMCOG. Up in the northern part of the state near Traverse City, we have Networks Northwest and those types of areas, and they have their own regions as well. And so that is what I have for the group, and I obviously am available to clarify anything that may have been unclear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. That is the end of the presentations, the formal presentations, and now we have time just for open question and answer period. I've encouraged the panelists just to have an open conversation among themselves as well. If one of them says something that the others think is particularly important to dig in further, they may just follow up directly that way. But at this point, we'll start it off with questions coming from any of the commissioners. MC, did I see you? Please go ahead.
I wanted to make sure that I understood. I believe that Lisa Neidert mentioned if we're going to use sort of draft, if we're going to draft maps using 2010 census data, it was important that we use correct data. And I wanted to make sure that I understood the meaning of, the correct piece. And I'm not sure. I just want to make sure I get clarification.
The correct version would be the one that takes into differential privacy. So you can use the original 2010 data, and then you can use the version where the Census Bureau has said, this is how we're going to release the 2020 data. It's a worry about confidentiality. NOAA had shown the picture of a census block. And so the fact that you can get a census block, not you, but if you're the only white person living in your block, then you are somewhat identified. So the differential privacy version, I'm just going to say mucks it up a little bit. And a lot of demographers and state demographers have taken, let me see how good or bad this is. They take the original 2010 data, and then they take the differential privacy version of it and say, ooh, is Kanawha County got an extra 1,500 people once they do this differential privacy version? So there are some variances in that, but anyone that you are dealing with as your expert that's going to help you make maps, if they don't know the word differential privacy, then you don't want to be hiring them. You all don't have to worry about it as much. And I think Eric has actually probably played with that, so he should probably weigh in more than I should.
So yeah, regarding the differentially private data, so to date, Census Bureau has put out several versions of the 2010 data with a differential privacy algorithm applied to it so that we could see the effects of the various improvements that they have been making to the algorithm. I can tell you to date, I have not seen a data set that I consider to be fit for use, which is concerning considering how soon these data are set to be released. Some of the issues that we have seen when we have been doing analyses of these data are when we do block level analyses, we see areas with very high characteristic concentration. And so just not to use jargon, but when we see areas that have high concentration of, so let's say, for example, a block that has a large number of African-Americans. So African-American, that would be a characteristic of the population. So areas with high characteristic concentration tend to have their concentration lowered, and areas with low characteristic concentration have had their characteristic contributions raised to even that out, which could be problematic when we are talking about stitching together individual census blocks to create a larger region, especially if we're trying to keep communities of interest together, because the fear is with that type of error involved, there will be a multiplicative effect of that error, which could sort of undo what the attempts that are trying to be made for making more fair districts. Now, this process is under development. There has not been a final top-down algorithm data set that has been shown to us in any sort of final form. And I have a feeling that up until the day that they're going to be releasing the data, they're going to be continuing to work on that algorithm. The Census Bureau has been getting a lot of feedback on it. But just the bottom line is the data that you're going to be receiving is.
I think we may have lost Eric for a second there. Lisa,
I'll jump in
Noah?
there to clarify. I think I know what he was
going to be have noise infused into it.
Yeah, you're back.
Am I back? Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know where I got lost, but what I was saying is the data you're going to get is going to have noise infused to it to some degree, and so that's why I was recommending you having somebody on staff that is, and to echo, I think what Lisa was saying, that is familiar with what census has been doing to protect the privacy of respondents this census, so that if you see something, so that they can tell you if something doesn't look right when you start aggregating areas together.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Aaron, please go ahead.
Lisa, you had mentioned that sometimes redistricting commissions care about the prisoners, and I was wondering if you could clarify exactly when that would be. I would imagine it might have something to do with the amount of prisoners in an area and when they would be released to where they could vote, if that's kind of what you were thinking or not.
Yeah. So there's probably a website called Prisoners of the Census, and what it ends up being is prisoners are often not located in the community they came from. And so it ends up giving more representation to some place in northern Michigan. And you are a city council in a little village, and you have a population of 2,500 in your district because we've made them all equal. And it ends up that there's only 46 non-prisoners because you happen to take the prison. So in some ways, the voting population of your district is tiny compared to the rest of the districts in that little community someplace up north. So since typically those villages are not answering the needs of prisoners, you know, our road is bumpy, we have bad water, they're not really being represented by that city council person. So some states have specifically said, we're not going to let you pad your representation areas with prisoners that are being taken care of by the city of or state of New York or the state of Maryland. And so the Census Bureau does give that information that they can be pulled out of the voting districts at the state and local level. You're right. People wanted to have the prisoners attributed back to the community they came from. And the Census Bureau was asked to look at that, and they said, yeah, we can't really do it. Sometimes the address that the prisoner grew up in no longer exists, so they can't really find it. And so they do not put prisoners back into the population, the city that they came from. So it's a little bit different than what you're saying, but it's the idea that we don't want to have your district, and there are definitely cases of a school board member that's those are usually at large, but like I said, a village trustee that's representing very few real residents of that community, because the prisoners are not going in and grocery shopping and attending schools and going to doctors in the community. But I don't think Michigan has a big push to do that, but nationwide, there are states that do that. You can look at a map of the state of Michigan. It still could be of interest to your committee. If you make a map of the group quarters population, you can actually see some darkening in places in the UP and then in the central upper lower peninsula. And so maybe those counties, they all have something in common, that they've got prisons in them, so that maybe they consider themselves a community of interest. Because they do have that similarity. So you can see these clumps showing up where prisons are located in the state.
If I could just add on to what Lisa was saying, at least you're absolutely correct. And another issue that some folks have been concerned about is the prison populations tend to be disproportionately persons of color, right? And so what we see is a shifting of voting and political power away from communities of color and into rural areas, which tend to be whiter, and then those persons of color are not able to vote. So their power is essentially given to those communities. So I mean that is a concern for people that are active in this discussion as well. And you know, the Census Bureau has offered to do some tabulations to help states that do a reallocation of prisoners back to their home places, but the state would have had to have given Census Bureau data on those populations. And to my knowledge, Michigan has not done that. So I don't believe that the census will be able to provide Michigan with those data.
I have a number of, oh, I'm sorry, Aaron, yes, please.
I just had another question for Noah. Noah, you mentioned that Wayne and Genesee counties have, or we're expecting them to have a loss of population. Could you tell us what that transpired from?
Good question. I don't know if I can point to one single cause. You know, the map that I showed highlighted loss of population in those two counties and then an increase of population in the suburban counties between the two. So that is 1 decade's worth of a 40-year, 4 or 5 decade long pattern of migration out of those cities, predominantly by white residents. So that is probably, you know, the last decade, the trend continuing. Related to that question, but also to what Lisa and Eric were just discussing, is as the commission begins to think about where communities of interest are, I think it's very important to keep in mind how entrenched patterns of residential segregation by both class but also race are across the country, but also in this state. And those patterns of residential segregation are often drawn along the boundary line between cities. between individual cities and suburban cities next door. So as you think about the process of deciding where communities of interest are and how to define what one district could or should be versus another, I think it's important to keep in mind that those, when you look at the map and you look at the distribution of population, you're looking at decades of historical patterns of demographic change, often from one city to the next. And there are very stark patterns of residential segregation, primarily by race, primarily between white and Black residents, between cities. So using the city boundary as a way of delineating or distinguishing between potential districts brings with it decades of history. And it's important to be aware that that's the case, that cities redraw their borders, there's jurisdictional borders also via municipal annexation. And annexation is very common. So cities can, that's not redistricting, but they can gerrymander in very similar ways. So the city boundaries themselves are not an ahistorical way to distinguish communities of interest. To use city boundaries is to use the history of the city itself and its demographic population. So just something to keep in mind as you think about these issues.
As we move forward for Genesee County also, Noah is absolutely correct that migration has been important for understanding that population, but as we move forward, natural decline is going to be a more important factor in terms of there being more deaths than births in the county.
Is that considered domestic migration, what Noah was just describing? Or is that something different, domestic migration?
Likely. So when I was talking about the state in terms of domestic versus international migration, the state has seen positive net migration in recent years because of the high amount of international migration we have seen, because we have still lost more residents to other states than we have gained. So that we did not do that analysis down to the county level. It was part of our analysis for determining total migrants that we later disaggregated to the county level. But if the pattern held true, then they would likely be the same as well.
International migration is an interesting question. Can you tell us more, how much do we know about the populations that have come into Michigan in the last decade or 2 decades? Where have they come from? Have they settled into particular parts of the state? This feels like something that could easily tie into the issue of communities of interest. Are there particular sources of data to turn to learn more about this?
There are. I'm sorry, I'm assuming that question was directed to me, but if I stepped over somebody else, I apologize. There are ways to understand that. There are census tables that will help. There are also microdata that are available for slightly larger geographic areas. I mean, maybe a little less help for the commission, but we can get data for place of birth and year of entry from the American Community Survey microdata that should help a lot. And I believe that those data are available in sort of more broad categories in the summary data as well. So those data are available, so we can look around and see where those immigrant communities of interest are located and how long they've been there.
And is it typical, do we know, any of our panelists, is it typical for redistricting efforts to look at other sources of data beyond just the census?
Well, one thing, I said the 2020 census was the short form census. The Census Bureau every single year is collecting data on something called the long form census, and it asks, like Eric said, place of birth, where did you live last year? And that's where we'll figure out that people are leaving Detroit but staying within Wayne County. And your education and lots of other variables. And I think that in some ways, some of those variables could be helpful for figuring out a little bit about communities of interest. The thing is that they don't go down to tiny, tiny geographies. But for a lot of the state, from about Gaylord up, many of the congressional districts don't even cross county lines. They're made of an entire county. Now, some of the state house districts definitely, but there's something called a county subdivision, a county division. So you can get quite a bit of information from that. But then a variable like age, that's an old demographic variable, and about Gaylord up, it's older people, Gaylord down, it's young people. And the Upper Peninsula is all these, what's it called? Natural decrease counties. They have more deaths than births, and it's not because they have poor health up there, it's just they have old people. And the young people are moving to cities, and so they're just aging in place. Maine is one of the oldest states in the nation. No one's migrating there to retire. Young people are just leaving. So I think you would be well served to look at the American Community Survey data, which both Eric and Noah showed in their slides.
Another question, kind of stepping away from the details of data. How would you, our three panelists, advise the commission when it comes to choosing a vendor who will be working with the data, who will be drawing the maps? Lisa, you noted if a vendor has not heard of the term differential privacy, that's going to be a big red flag. Stay away from that vendor. Are there other tips that you would give to the commission for how to choose vendors to work with the data and draw the maps?
Well, I think they should be familiar with, there are a lot of websites that have looked at redistricting across the nation for every single state. And they say, what if I just start in this little corner and make myself a congressional district and let the computer randomly accumulate populations. And so it's done with an algorithm with no nefarious purposes. And then you do that and you have a lot of county breaks. So you do another one where you put a rule in and say, try and minimize those county breaks. So the vendor has got to be familiar with not the old fashioned way of how everyone on the commission could do this with colored pencils and drawing and accumulating the populations by hand. So they've got to have a lot of mapping skills, but data skills as well. And there are a lot of people that know how to do that. And you can see, I teach a course where I have the students look at all different kinds of maps drawn with different ideas in mind. And so I would just make sure that the vendor knows how to do more than just taking the existing map and saying, okay, this population's got to be a little bit bigger. Let's steal it from this one, and just tweaking the current map, which maybe would be what an unskilled vendor would do. Eric and Noah are much better map people, so they can tell more about that.
Yes, and we'll come back to that. I see Doug has a follow-up here, or a new question.
Yeah, I do. It's relative to this. Do you have a list of what you would call preferred vendors, maybe 4 or 5 of them, that we could, do some research on and because eventually we're gonna have to select one and get one through an RFP.
So I can tell you that the state, we have a redistricting commission of that looks at more of the technical stuff in terms of making sure the census has the data that they need and that we're pulling in the data correctly, work with Bureau of Elections to make sure that the elections data are put together. And so, and then they've actually looked at, the various vendors that do like Maptitude, and there are a number of other ones. And I believe that when Rob Serber presents to the group, that he might be able to speak more to the specific vendors that are providing those products, because there are a number of them, but that group has already seen presentations and has an idea on the at least which vendors out there have been used by Michigan in the past and which vendors out there are supplying what at least that group thought when they were going to be doing the redistricting would have been important. So advice might be beneficial from CSS on that, unless anybody else on the panel has specific suggestions from products or groups that they've worked with as well.
I guess I would say I think the product you're using is less important than the person running it, because y'all would do no good. I would do no good if somebody just plopped some mapping software on my computer and said, this is the magic bullet. And if you don't have any clue of how to do it, and several of you would figure it out, but you would in no way be an expert. So it's somebody that's got facility. I hope you're getting more than just a vendor that's got software. I hope a person comes along with that software.
I think one additional, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think on that note, I think having someone who will liaise with you, work with you to possibly to produce maps, sample maps for you, or to be engaged in assisting you to make some maps is crucial. But the technological side can get a little complex, but I want to emphasize that the process of, in many ways, the process of looking at a map, a sample map, and figuring out for yourself whether it feels right, whether it seems to have been produced via a fair process, I think you'll find is fairly intuitive, and you'll get to talk about it as a commission. So even if the technological part is intimidating in some ways, the process itself of coming to a decision should be fairly straightforward, because I think when you look at a map that has been gerrymandered, many of us will see it and say, what is up with that there? So I think you will, I hope it will not be as onerous or as daunting as it might seem if the technology is new.
Just been told I need to correct something. I referred to the state committee as a commission, and that was an error. You are the commission, but we have a state committee that works on some of the technical aspects. So pardon me on that. And just one last thought, as far as vendors, if you have a vendor coming to you telling you what you should be doing, that might be a red flag versus a vendor that comes to you and asks you what you think the map should look like, because that's obviously why you're here. Right? So,
yeah, MC.
So I want to make sure I'm hearing that we will have to use algorithms, and the process, meaning that we're going to use software that's going to use algorithms. And one of the things I've been understood is that we could potentially be sued because there's things that can be manipulated behind the scenes in these algorithms. But there's a process that we will go through as a commission to draw these maps using software that uses algorithms, but we will essentially be able to, we have to use algorithms, but we just have to create a process and allow it to be seen and transparent. And then we're ultimately creating good redistricting maps. Is that fair to say that we have to use algorithms?
I think I misspoke a little bit. I'm saying that sometimes when algorithms are used, it can reveal what the state what its congressional districts would look like had there been no human input. And you're right, algorithms certainly can have something hidden, some bias in them, but not all the choices you make are based on completely let the computer take charge. You can say that I want it to be accumulating a random, as much as possible, I want the racial distribution of each district to look the same. Well, that's going to be pretty hard to do in Michigan, but you could at that point be going, okay, we need this little thin slice to be going all the way up. And so that's telling it a rule, but you're telling what the rule is. So it's not a mystery box rule. But what is interesting about the algorithm-based redistricting programs, when they choose that choice, it ends up, you can see that, okay, maybe this state shouldn't have 13 for one party and 5 for another party. Had they used this mysterious algorithm, it would have been 9 and 9. So, but then you can look at it and say, I don't like the way it looks. Go in there with a human hand and change this, and go ahead and change this. But you're have good instincts to worry about that. The map maker is just going to push a button, and you all don't get to have any input because the program is the expert, and you're just supposed to sit there with your hands folded. So there are a lot of computer programs where you have explicit rules that you get to control and say, I want it to do this, I want it to do that.
Yes, Anthony.
Kind of to add to this idea of using different types of software that use mathematical models to assist us in drawing the maps. I think it will also be important to know or have explained to us, in detail, how those models came to be and what the different variables in those models are, especially because, we have specific criteria we have to go by in the Constitution. So we'll have to make sure that whatever vendor that we choose and whatever model that software uses matches up with that criteria that we have to abide by.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific point, Anthony. One additional complication, I think, in all of this that I'd be interested to hear from our panelists if they're aware of any other states that maybe have gone through this. The issue of communities of interest. You commissioners, as you're going around the state and holding public hearings, presumably you're going to get maps handed to you. Some may be simply, drawn on a piece of paper saying, here roughly is a community of interest in my county. And that's not data that can just be, plugged into an algorithm. It's going to be a, hand-drawn piece of paper. So I don't think we have any good sense yet for how many communities of interest will be submitting information to you. Could be a lot. To our panelists, do we know of other redistricting experiences across the country that have had to kind of incorporate less formal data, and whether there are any best practices for how to approach that?
I don't have any good advice on that. Sorry.
No, that's okay. There may not be good examples. I'm not aware.
Well, I think you could come from drawing like Battle Creek and Kalamazoo might want to be in the same congressional district. And so you just start out with that constraint that those two counties are treated as one Uber county. And I think that is a possibility. You will have an idea of some areas in the thumb that might need to stay together. And I think that would be the kind of question you should be asking the map maker, saying, we've been going around and talking to these areas, and in Detroit has a whole bunch of community areas that were created in the 1980s. None of them are big enough to be a congressional district, but maybe you don't want to draw a line smack through, I think a Palmer Park is one, but there's lots of community areas in Detroit. And so you say, we would like to, as much as possible, not maybe keeping all of them. I don't know which ones are still resonant with folks that live in Detroit, or maybe there's a new one. You can say, we want these census tracts to stay together. Can your, the Middle East, North African population, there are certain communities, it's not just Dearborn, it's several communities in Southeast Michigan that might want to be clumped together. they're not big enough to be their own congressional district, but please don't leave out one little part. So that's the kind of thing to ask the map maker, saying, we're just going to put Crayola marks on what we think these areas need to stay together. Can you draw maps with these constraints? And they can. And that's where, again, there's got to be respect both ways, where they are taking your input of what you are constrained by the commission of what you're supposed to be paying attention to.
We have about 10 minutes left. Yes, Anthony.
I think what'll, this might be at this point of where we are in the process. I know, some of us might feel a little overwhelmed, but I think once we get out there and start visiting the communities that we have to go visit, it'll become rather clear on what those communities want.
MC, please.
I have a question that's it's personal. So I work with group housing. I work in a community cooperatives and I'm just curious if cooperatives or housing cooperatives are considered part of that data. This I think is directed at you, Lisa. When you were looking at, do you know if housing cooperatives are part of the group model within the census?
Well, first of all, did you get a census questionnaire that was mailed to you?
Not,
Yes.
I mean, my business did, but not me. But yeah, that's what I was
Oh,
curious.
you didn't get it at your house?
So I live in a, let's say, an individual family home in a neighborhood, but I work with group housing. So I was just curious.
Okay. I believe the people like the co-housing units and stuff, the co-housing communities, those are each individual. They're treated as individually. But it's a good question. I mean, the U of M has dorms, and then they have a lot of these high rises that are suspiciously like dorms, 6-bedroom units, but those are not group quarters. So,
Do you know about the cooperatives at the U of M? So they're student housing cooperatives, and I wonder if they're.
Yeah, I don't know about those. The nitty-gritty details, don't know.
So I just wanted to jump in on that. I guess it would depend on what you mean by cooperatives, because if we're talking about multiple people living in the same facility and then being provided services or anything like that, that is generally going to be a group quarter. So if you think of like adult foster care, if you think of places with persons with disabilities or living in a congregate living arrangement, that is all going to be a group quarters type of situation, or it's supposed to be a group quarters type of a situation. So I'm not familiar enough with that term of housing cooperative to speak specifically to it. But if you're having people living in a facility and receiving services, then that's more than likely going to be considered a group quarters type of situation. And if you received a questionnaire at your facility to answer about all the residents in your facility, then that was likely a group quarters questionnaire.
We've heard a decent amount about concerns of undercounts on this census, undercounts of potential different types of groups. To our panelists, are you particularly concerned about this census undercounting particular groups in Michigan? And if so, is there anything to be done about it?
I have some things to say, but I welcome the other members of the panel to go first if you have some ideas on that.
There's definitely worry nationwide about potential undercount, and it's pretty typical. Once malapportionment was gotten rid of, then people were more worried about undercount, because it didn't make any difference if your district was 900,000 and some other one was 150. Why worry about undercount? But now, if they're all supposed to be the same size, undercount comes into effect, and there is worry that some of our communities might have been undercounted. I don't think Michigan is any different than any other place, but I suspect there are going to be suits nationwide about this being a bad census, but you need to just plow on and wait to see if there's any remedy for the undercounted communities.
Okay, so as far as undercounts that I'm personally concerned about the undercount around college campuses, not necessarily in the group quarters or the dorm populations, but in the areas around college campuses where students lived in housing units and may have left due to COVID issues prior to the time when they would have been counted in what would have been an early non-response follow-up operation that was scheduled to occur in March and April that did not happen. And because it was meant to get those college students before they left for the summer. I'm not concerned about the prison populations or anything like that. I think DOC probably was giving them good information. I am concerned about our communities of color broadly, as they are oftentimes communities that are more difficult to count or do not respond to the census to the same level. Michigan has had historically a fairly high response rate to the census. Last census, it was estimated that we had a very, very slight overcount of the population. What I'm concerned about with is really a whitening of the population in terms of if we get a very solid count of the white population, but we have issues with our count of our communities of color, our state may look whiter than it actually is, which is obviously problematic for a number of reasons. So there are a variety of aspects of undercount and communities in specific that are very concerning. This census, because of the timing issues and because of COVID and because of differential privacy and a variety of other things.
Rebecca and then Aaron. Oh, I'm sorry, Rebecca did not have a question. Aaron, if you'd like to go.
With regards to the undercounting subject, I know that on this census, I don't remember if it was on the last census or not, but at least this time, I got a email or a message, a text message, because I had not filled out the paper form of the census. I could go online and fill that out. Do we have, or will we have, counts of how many people actually filled out online as opposed to the paper counting, and how would that affect underreporting at that point?
That is a variable on this census long form. They have on whether you filled it out. That's called paradata, so that you have information on, how the person filled it out. And sometimes if you fill it out in private as opposed to face-to-face, you might answer differently. You might shave 10 years off your age or whatever. I mean, that's a bad example, but the Census Bureau definitely keeps track of who did it online. There's parts of the state of Michigan up in the UP where they just mailed paper questionnaires. They knew people didn't have good Wi-Fi service up there and stuff. So there's different parts of the nation that got forms dropped off in person because they didn't have normal mail delivery addresses. So the Census Bureau, and they have places they said, we better do this and have a Spanish language questionnaire. Come to this part of these 5 blocks or whatever, or both both languages, English and Spanish. But the undercount is more that people are not answering, or they're not getting knocked. The follow-up wasn't very good. Michigan is actually a very good state. I was very disappointed with the state that we were in good shape on self-response, but then when it was non-response follow-up, we fell behind, and instead of being in the top 6 or so states, we dropped quite a bit. But in the end, we supposedly caught most of our population. But
Okay, well, I think we're just about at our time unless there's any last question from any commissioner. Yes, Juanita. You're muted.
I was always curious of how you all kept up with the people that lived in apartment buildings. I live in Detroit, and there are a lot of apartments in Detroit. How do you keep up with these people when they're moving all the time in and out of apartments with the census?
So the census is a count of the population as of April 1st. So the Census Bureau, their plan was to, enter apartment buildings and go door to door to every apartment.
Oh, okay.
If the population didn't answer either online or with a form, the first question they ask them, is were you living here on April 1st? And then they proceed with the interview from there. So the Bureau did. There always is some issues with getting into secure buildings, but they work through that sort of thing. But they do go through and knock on every door in apartment buildings. And as part of the lead up to the census, the local update of census addresses, all local areas were invited to submit addresses which included apartment numbers to the Census Bureau, and Detroit did participate in that program. So.
Yeah, to further answer that, I was actually a non-response follow-up, interviewer, and you'd come knock on a door, and then, we're way late. We're interviewing people in August instead of April. But let's say somebody's at an apartment and they were living there on April 1st, but by now their 22-year-old child is not living there. We say, who was living here on April 1st. So you're supposed to be capturing the people, even if they're not living there now. But apartments are hard. There were a lot of glass door entryways. So you have to get the manager of the company to let you in. And then you leave a little thing saying, I came knocking on door 17, please. And then there's a phone number and a URL for the person to respond without somebody having to physically come by. But there is less good count of renters than there is of homeowners. So.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that wraps up our time. I'd like to leave you commissioners with the thought that we heard from Professor Justin Levitt back in one of those early September webinars, which was especially compared to some of the gerrymandered maps that we've had in the past. You would have to work pretty hard to design bad maps. You all are going to have a lot of resources at your disposal, and I think there's every confidence that the maps you end up with are going to be pretty good. So this has been kind of overwhelming. Michigan's a big state. It's a complicated state. There are a lot of different sources of data to turn to. At the end of the day, you would have to work pretty hard to do a bad mapping job here. So I hope that's a little positive end to this session. I'd like to thank the commissioners for giving us your time. Thank our panelists for volunteering their time. And thanks again to the team at the Department of State for making it easy for us to do this. Thank you all.
Well, before everybody takes off, I would like to thank on behalf of the commission, you, Tom, for moderating this for us, Lisa, Noah, and Eric for the information that they provided. It's all very good information, and we will certainly put it to use. And I assume that we'll be back in touch with all of these fine experts when we have questions coming up. I'm assuming they'll allow us to do that. So once again, thank you all, and have a good rest of the week and wonderful holidays coming up. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
At this time, we've been at it for a while, so let's take a 10-minute break and come back about, well, 1:59 would be 2 o'clock. Just be back at 2 o'clock. Okay, it looks like everybody's back. Just as kind of a brief general conversation, what did everybody think about the seminar? And I'll start. I thought they did a nice job, give us a lot of information so that we now know what we don't know. It's a known unknown, and we won't know what the we know the unknown will not change until sometime next year. So be interesting to see what the court does with some of the stuff today. I haven't heard, but any other comments?
Cynthia?
Yeah, I really appreciated that. I was happy to be able to take in more, understand more information than previously when people were trying to teach us things. So I think it's coming slowly, and I look forward to learning more.
It'll be interesting to see what the quote map makers have to say to us when we start talking to some of them. So, oh well. Old business, we're up to
Juanita had a hand raise.
Oh, I'm sorry, Juanita. Juanita, did you have something to say?
I think she's trying to figure out how to unmute, I think.
Can't hear you, Juanita.
Yes, I had my hand up because
I apologize.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry.
Yes, you can.
I had my hand up because I thought it was very, very informative. So much so I need to hear it. I'd love to hear more and more so we can really get a good idea of what we're doing. But I thought it was great. It was very informative.
I agree, Juanita. And what I took away from that is I think, when we are looking for this, wonderful map maker vendor, when we find the right person, we'll have that experience again of them literally walking us through the process and being able to actually feel like we have a hand in making a positive change. So yeah, I think it'll be just fine. No worries for me, at least.
Okay, great. Next is old business and a Department of State update. Sally, are you bringing that to us?
Hey, everybody. Yes, I will be, and then I'll be handing it over to Mike. So just to kind of round out the conversation about the webinar, I'm so glad that was so helpful to all of you. We have another one tomorrow from Rob Serber, who is the Enterprise Portfolio Management Office Director, which is quite a mouthful of a title, but the bottom line is he is one of the people who helps oversee and manage the data that, some of the data at least, that Eric Guthrie and others were speaking to from the Center for Shared Solutions within state government. So he'll be able to kind of walk through what's already available and agreed on a nonpartisan and bipartisan basis within the state of Michigan. It's something that we have, some other states have, some other states don't have. So it's a hopefully will be a helpful presentation to all of you in understanding what's been done and maintained by, like I said, a bipartisan and nonpartisan group. And what he'll kind of talk about, and I wanted to make sure to parse out 2 or 3 different concepts from the past presentation you all just heard, which is the data itself, the software that you use to access and manipulate the data and actually draw the maps, and then any consultant or vendor that would either bring the software and the expertise to actually draw the lines, or potentially just the expertise and you all would purchase the software, right? So sort of these like 3 different buckets, and I wanted to make sure to just emphasize that what Rob Serber can talk about tomorrow can kind of build on today's conversation in terms of both data that you can use, and he has experience helping state government in Michigan obtain the software that's needed in order to manipulate it. So he can, as you're kind of parsing through these things and what you're going to need, he can kind of talk to both of those pieces. But historically, and I'm sure it will continue, the committee that he oversees and that has been maintained for a while stays far away from the actual map drawing part of it. So that sort of third piece of the mapping consultant is not what they do by design, right? And so I just kind of wanted to provide that further context to all of you. Hopefully that'll be a helpful discussion. And Matt Grossman will be back to help moderate that conversation and bridge the 2 conversations that you had today and then tomorrow. I'm not sure if we will have time to do any further webinars before the end of the year, but trust me, I've got the list. I'm trying to do some follow-up with some of the folks, and then certainly once you have your executive director on board and others to kind of further help bring those together so you can keep diving into the information. So working on it, but I wanted to make sure you at least got these 2 pieces before the end of the year. And then just a quick note on compensation. The good news is I think we're quickly going to be able to move forward here. The way that Kelly Services, I just learned the way that Kelly Services actually does payroll is on a weekly basis. So you'll have that a weekly sum as opposed to the every 2 weeks that was discussed. And they will be able to provide a sort of lump sum up front that will cover the time between when you actually start receiving your payroll and the beginning of this past fiscal year, which was October 1st. So more details to come, but I've gotten clarification on both of those points. And my expectation is that you'll be getting communication from them directly soon on signing paperwork and contracts. So continuing to move that ball forward. And I know that Mike is trying to call back in. I think he had to drop off. Let me see if I can see him here. Oh, he is on now. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Mike for just a brief update on the executive hire piece, and then he can turn it over to Doug and Rhonda. Mike, can you hear us?
Oh, I think I was on mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Hi, Mike. Go
Very
ahead.
good. Thank you. Good afternoon. Mike Brady from Michigan Department of State. I was calling, just wanted to provide a brief update on the follow-up to the executive director conversation 2 days ago. I'd emailed with Rhonda and Doug. Basically, the question had come up that I thought more about after we got off Tuesday's meeting. And the question concerns the Open Meetings Act, and it concerns specifically whether in the commission's full delegation of authority to Rhonda and Doug, and whether that effectively created a new committee, committee. There had been a prior committee, of course, that was set up for the purpose of reviewing applicants for the executive director position, and not eliminating any, but just reviewing, doing due diligence, and then coming back with a recommendation on who this commission should interview, and then take it from there. And as I thought about it, and then ultimately consulted with some other Open Meeting Act attorney experts, there was a concern that with the commission, that there's a way to. It was a close enough call that I wanted to just bring it back to you all and clarify this to avoid any kind of lawsuit that someone might bring against you all for the Open Meetings Act. And so I think just knowing we had the meeting today, I figured it was better to err on the side of caution, and just to kind of avoid that altogether. So basically, it came out of the question of the delegation of authority. Had this commission delegated to Rhonda and Doug merely the ministerial act of reaching out and gathering information, all of that, and bringing it back for this commission to make the formal offer, or rather to say arrive at the formal decision of what the salary should be. So you're going to offer 50%, we're going to offer, at what point within that range. But instead, what I recalled of Tuesday's meeting was that this commission had actually formally delegated the authority to not just have the conversation, gather information, and frankly, even negotiate, but to actually arrive at a decision that would be binding on this commission. And that is a delegation of authority. The authority to make that decision rests with this commission. This commission can delegate that authority to Rhonda and Doug, but in so doing, it at that point would have, again, there's an argument both ways, but I think ultimately, even if you went in court, it sure would be a distraction with everything else to even have that lawsuit. And so if that's what this commission wants to do, then Rhonda and Doug, we can still proceed that way. We can notice a public meeting for them to speak openly with the candidate, forgive me, Ms. Hammersmith, and have that actual negotiation back and forth happen in that regard. And then whatever Rhonda and Doug, decide there, they would have the authority still of this commission to make that offer and have it be binding. Alternatively, this commission could clarify that Rhonda and Doug are simply performing a ministerial act. They'd be reaching out to Ms. Hammersmith, gathering information, could even discuss certain numbers, but with an understanding from both of them, and also more to the point from Ms. Hammersmith, that Rhonda and Doug are not authorized to make a binding offer, and rather would be able to hear out any concerns, any preferences, any needs that that candidate may have in terms of benefits or otherwise in salary, and then bring that back as a recommendation to this commission. And then this commission would retain its sole authority to make the decision. And if we were to approach the latter, or use the latter approach, then Rhonda and Doug would not be a committee. They would not have binding authority. You would not have given them any real authority to act or to bind or to do anything else that would affect Ms. Hammersmith or the commission. So that's the update. Apologies for not thinking of that kind of fully on Tuesday. One of the questions that I wanted to round out, in case one of you asked the question, earlier in the conversation on Tuesday, there was a question, well, could the Department of State do this for us? And I responded at one point and said, well, perhaps chair and vice chair, and ultimately the commission decided to have it be Doug and Rhonda. To clarify, even if this commission were to ask, for example, Sally and I to go and, do the other approach, it doesn't matter who you if you gave someone binding authority or authority to make an offer that is binding and to make that decision, that itself would be the creation of a public body, regardless of whether those individuals on that committee so delegated, whether those individuals are actually commissioners, as is the case with Rhonda and Doug, or if it was Sally and I. It wouldn't make any difference on that particular point.
So Mike, do I understand what you're saying is that Doug and Rhonda can go have a conversation with Ms. Hammersmith and in general terms say, we're considering hiring you. What are you looking for as salary, benefits, etc. Come up with some parameters of which would be acceptable, then bring those back to us for discussion, and we as the commission would then make a final decision. Is that what you're saying?
It is.
Okay. So that would require a new motion from someone to authorize Doug and Rhonda to make contact with Ms. Hammersmith without committing to a formal contract, bring it back for approval by us, assuming that she wants to do something. She may have changed her mind by now. Rhonda.
Just a quick question for Mike. So if we take that route, are Doug and I still allowed to talk beforehand to organize what we want to ask her, whether it be what type of compensation are you looking at? Are you looking at, are we able then to communicate with each other, not just Ms. Hammersmith? I'm just very by the rules and I don't want to do anything to mess up.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate the question and I appreciate your attention to detail, and particularly on that particular, on that point. I think it'll serve you and the commission very well over the duration of your tenure. I believe that you would. So in particular, I'm looking at the constitutional amendment. This is Article 4, Section 6. In particular, I direct you to subsection 11. And so I know we've gone over this many times, but I'm going to read it again because I find it frankly helpful for myself, but also just as a refresher, and then also certainly for members of the public who may be watching. So section 11 says, I'm sorry, this is subsection 11, says the commission, its members, staff, attorneys, and consultants shall not discuss redistricting matters with members of the public outside of an open meeting of the commission, except that a commissioner may communicate about redistricting matters with members of the public to gain information relevant to the performance of his or her duties if such communication occurs, and then there are two exceptions here, A, in writing, or B, at a previously publicly noticed forum or town hall open to the general public. So a few different things on this, not to go on for too long, but I think it's worth, again, just breaking it down, certainly my read of it, and if anyone else has a different read, by all means, I think it's important for everyone to be on the same page here. So the subject of the sentence is the commission, its members, its staff, its attorneys, and its consultants. So Rhonda and Doug, you are both members of the commission to the subject. And then it says, shall not discuss specifically redistricting. I suppose someone might argue that anything you do is redistricting. I don't think that's a reasonable interpretation of the language. And I would never presume to know exactly what a judge would say, but I just don't think that's a reasonable interpretation. I think that, shall not discuss redistricting matters. And then it says with members of the public. So it doesn't even say amongst each other. It says, this is a limitation on whether you can discuss these things. Again, that's outside the commission, its members, its staff, its attorneys, and consultants shall not discuss specifically redistricting. And then with whom? With members of the public. It doesn't even say amongst each other. So I think the read on 11 as a prohibition that would otherwise affect you is that individual conversations between specifically Rhonda and Doug on this matter don't apply for two reasons. One, the prohibition is not between two members of this commission speaking on any topic. The prohibition is between members, staff, attorneys, consultants, and members of the public. And so Rhonda and Doug are not members of the public for this. The candidate for whom you are discussing bringing on as an employee, if that person accepts, then someday that person will be staff. But right now that person is a member of the public. So that's a separate question. But in terms of Rhonda and Doug, you can speak with each other because the prohibition doesn't apply to you since you're both members. It goes on, I would say the other reason it does not apply to you on this topic is that you are not discussing redistricting. You are redistricting matters. You are discussing an employment contract for this commission to hire staff, a specific staff person. And I just don't think there's any other way to read that particular prohibition. And so that I think takes you to the next question beyond Rhonda, simply whether you and Doug can speak with each other. I think, can you and Doug speak with Ms. Hammersmith and, who is a member of the public still, if and until she accepts an offer of employment with you. And I think you can because what you're discussing in is an employment matter. It is not a redistricting matter. Again, I should say, so long as you don't get into a conversation about redistricting and you're simply talking about her potential employment with this public body. So that's, the full answer there. I want to briefly acknowledge that subsection 10 does talk about, it has a line in there that came up in some of our internal conversations here at the Department of State. I don't think it's actually applicable, but I'm just going to acknowledge it. It says, this subsection 10 second sentence says the commission shall conduct all of its business at open meetings. And so it doesn't have a restriction about redistricting. It says all of its business. However, the subject in that sentence is not, the subject in that sentence is the commission. It says the commission shall conduct. After that, it says, it talks about the functioning of those meetings. 9 commissioners, including it, at least 1 commissioner from each selection pool shall constitute quorum. Next sentence, the commission shall provide advance notice. Next sentence, the commission shall conduct its hearings in a manner, et cetera. Next sentence, the commission shall use technology. So the focus of subsection 10 is entirely on the commission, which is not 13 of you individually, but the body politic of the commission itself, how you collectively act. Whereas 11 is in stark contrast. Subsection 11 talks about the commission, comma, its members, which is each of you, comma, its staff, its attorneys, its consultants. So I think the back and forth between the construction of the 2 subsections 10 and 11 provide clarity about what each of those are talking about. And 11 could have said, shall not discuss any of its business, but it didn't say that. It just said, shall not discuss redistricting matters. I hope that's helpful.
MC.
Mike, my only concern is the precedent that we may have set with the subcommittees, because I also believe that we didn't delegate authority to the subcommittees to actually choose the candidates. They were delegate, right? That we ultimately as a commission are choosing and hiring, but the subcommittees were whittling down. And I guess I'm just concerned that we may have set a precedent. I agree with your interpretation, right? But because we've actually created these subcommittees with the Open Meetings Act, I'm wondering if we're in danger of, sort of just in practice, if we've set up a precedent and that we should follow it with this small subcommittee.
Anthony.
Well, I mean, we did choose, we voted for someone to be the executive director. So, that person, at least as of now, is chosen. To make this, this process go a little faster, I don't see a reason why we can't discuss a job offer either now or tomorrow. Maybe, someone can write it up tonight and bring it to us tomorrow, and we can discuss it, we can approve it, and then after we all approve it, Doug and Rhonda could send it and say pretty much, this is our offer. This is your job offer. I mean, anytime I've had a job offer, I've had an offer sent to me, and then it's on me to either, accept, decline, or negotiate. But usually that's only after a written offer is sent to me first. So I'm just wondering what everyone's thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I think Rhonda had her hand up.
Rhonda.
I was just going to say, as far as discussing it and writing something up in the group, I think we were kind of all on the same page where we didn't want to put a number out there right away, because what if somebody would be willing to work for less, which saves the commission money. So I kind of think that's how we got to this: talk to her, see what she would expect, and then put out an offer to her. Maybe we could submit a paper to her, have one done up, like you said, offering employment and asking what her, I've had many employers ask, what is your expected pay range? What salary are you looking for? And that might direct us a little bit better. And then none of us would be, potentially breaking any rules if we, like you said, did do up a letter, but then got some additional information from her. Maybe, I don't know. I just don't want to get us sued. That's all I know.
Mike, yeah, I'd prefer to keep things not in writing until we have an initial discussion with her. And then, because we still have to come back to the committee or to the commission to get approval on that. And I'd hate to have something sitting out there in writing. I'd rather have it as an upfront discussion with her and see what's on her mind as well, and then come back.
Well, I think we're at the point, at least the suggestion was to have you, Doug, and you, Rhonda, get in contact with her, probably on a conference call, have a discussion, and bring it back to us for a decision. So that's a little change in what your marching orders were before. I'll make that as a motion. If there's a second, we can further discuss it or vote on it.
I second it.
Okay, any further discussion? Sally.
So yeah, hi everybody. I just thought I might kind of bring together what I hear Anthony saying, and I think what Mike is sort of trying to illustrate as an option for you all. I think to your point, Doug and Rhonda can kind of have that initial conversation, and then based on that conversation, have a draft letter that would be talked about tomorrow at tomorrow's commission meeting, for example. You all could agree on it or make any edits to it or make any changes and then have that in writing. So it's not, it's not not having anything in writing, but rather sort of having that ministerial research related conversation first before making a formal offer letter and kind of cementing that offer. So I just kind of wanted, I know it's sort of been embedded in things that Mike has said and others, but I wanted to kind of illuminate that as sort of what the next steps could look like beyond just Doug and Rhonda's conversation.
The offer letter though, Sally, is something you and I had discussed with Mike, and we're going to get some template coming out of HR to do that.
Yes, which I already have the template. I just need to update it for this commission with a new seal. It's pretty straightforward. So that would be easy to turn around, in other words,
correct,
in time for tomorrow.
Correct. Okay.
Well, that assumes that you, Doug, and Rhonda are going to be able to get a hold of her between now and tomorrow's meeting.
Yeah, well, Rhonda and I have to spend a little time together, and then we got to get a hold of her. Yes.
So maybe that happens, maybe that doesn't, but here's my point. We're meeting tomorrow. If it happens, fine, we can talk about it. If not, we're meeting on the 10th, and that would certainly give us enough time to do this. So,
okay.
All in favor of the motion with the discussion, raise your hand. Okay. Those opposed, raise your hand. Unanimously passed. So, however, Doug and Rhonda, you want to get a hold of her, and between you and Sally and everybody, bring us something back that we can live with.
Okay. I'll call you right after the meeting, Rhonda. Hey, Steve, there's one other item I want to bring up about the executive director.
Yes.
During some thought, when we previously had authorized the 13 of us to get computers and phones, we did not do it. That did not include the executive director and general counsel and so forth. So we need to authorize that money for when we hire these people in, so we can get the ball rolling on getting them that material. So I'd just like to put a motion forward that we authorize expenditures for the for all of the ICRC staff that we do hire. For example, being the executive director, general counsel, communications director, so that they can have mobile phones and laptops.
Okay. MC.
I was just seconding the motion.
Okay. Are we, and I don't want to limit it to, I guess I do want to limit it to the ED, the general counsel, and communications at this time.
Okay.
Then we can revisit it if we need to down the line. Would that be acceptable?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Been motioned and seconded to provide for laptops and phones for executive director, general counsel, and communications once they come on board. They don't have to all be here before they get them. All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed, same sign. That passes unanimously. Okay, we're up to general counsel candidate. Who's the committee?
I'm the chair of the committee, and MC and Richard are on the committee. So
Okay.
let me start by talking about the process that we used and make some comments on that. And then, as you know, we have two candidates that we're recommending. MC is going to talk about why we chose Julianne Pastula, and then I'll talk about James. And that's so to start off, what we did as a committee, and you got a copy of this from the meeting from earlier this week. We developed a scoring table that we used to evaluate each of the candidates, and we only had 11 candidates.
You see Mike?
My mic?
Hi, just want to clarify, consistent with our conversation about the Open Meetings Act, that I believe the committee is speaking to its, it was an advisory committee, and it's speaking right now to its recommendation that it made, but it's not, when it says like it chose, I think what Commissioner Clark means to say is why it arrived at its recommendation to this commission, and in no way did that limit the field for this commission to consider all of the applicants for the general counsel position. It's a very important distinction. I know that's what that committee has actually done, and I just want to make sure the record reflects that.
Okay.
Well, just as an aside, we decided several meetings ago when we started this process that the whole commission would look at all of the candidates before we made a final decision. So whether or not we're looking at 1, 2, or 3, or 4 today, we have the power. Any commissioner has the power to bring up anybody they want to.
Correct.
Exactly.
Thank
you. Sorry for the interruption.
This is just our recommendation coming out of the evaluation of 11. So we have a scoring sheet that we used, and the scoring sheet was developed based on the job posting and the supplemental questions that were posted as well as part of that job posting. Basically, what we have is 5 columns. First column being a category. And the categories that we decided to assess people on were based off entirely, with the exception of 2, entirely off of the job posting or the supplemental questions. Okay, and I'll get to what those 2 were in a minute. So the first 2 categories were requirements coming out of the job posting. So if the people did not meet those requirements, both of them, we didn't go any further with them. Okay, and they got 0 points. Everything's quantitative in this methodology we used. So then for each of the categories in the second column, we had a choice of 4 scores that you could give an individual, and a short definition of what those scores were. The third column was a comment, if you chose to make comments on that category. And then the fourth column is the important thing in my mind, and that we assigned to each of these categories a weighting, because we felt that some of the categories were more important to us than other categories. And then what we did, we took the weighting, multiplied it by the score in the second column, and came up with a number for each category. And then we totaled those up. Okay. And that gave us a quantitative measurement of individuals based on their experience and skills. The 2 categories that we added that were not part of the job posting was one that came out of our committee meeting, dealing with, I'm sorry, let me grab it here real quick. dealing with knowledge of the state of Michigan Constitution. That was never specified in the job posting, but we felt that was a very important thing. And then the other was kind of a catch-all category, which dealt with overall general impression, other favorable or unfavorable comments that we would want to make on that individual. So what we did is that we took those scores, and unfortunately, we only had one committee meeting. So we took those scores and listed our top 5 candidates and talked about our top 5 candidates. And we then decided to use the initial scoring sheet without that one category. And the reason we did that was because we just don't have the time. But we felt we were right on spot on this. So we did that, and we came up with something interesting. We had 3 people float to the top with higher scores, and then we had a big separation on the numbers. And that separation was, I believe, for one person, and then we had another big separation that lumped all the rest of the people involved. So that separation kind of gave us the opportunity to see who were the top candidates that we had in front of us. So one of the things that, before we discuss this, one of the things that we did discuss was that we wanted to limit our recommendations to 2 people. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to allow an hour, minimum 45 minutes, probably an hour of interviews for each of the candidates, which was going to take time. But that was important to us because we want to have more time to connect with the candidates personally and understand how they would fit into the team. So that was important to us. And then have additional time to deliberate as a commission to talk about these people. Okay. So that's kind of the methodology we use. And as we mentioned Monday, we came up with Julianne Pastula as one of those candidates and James Lancaster as one of the other candidates. So let me make a comment, and this is directed more toward any individual from the public that's listening. This whole purpose was to come up with a short list of individuals. And that short list was our recommendation on who we thought was the most qualified based on their experiences. And what we used as our source was the resumes that they produced, and that's it. We didn't go out on the internet. We didn't go do any other research. We used that as our mechanism to identify these people. Again, because we assess them according to the categories they're on the job posting, which was what we were looking for. So, given that, to have an understanding of the process, and again, this is for the public that may be listening, is that's our short list. It's based on nothing but the resumes that came out, and that's what we're going to recommend to the commission to talk about. But there's more to selecting the ultimate individual that we're going to hire. And that's what I want to spend just 1 minute on. There's additional things in the process. And the reason I want to spend 1 additional minute on this is because we've gotten a number of feedback from the public about one of the individuals. And some of it pro, some of it con. And the important thing to recognize is we appreciate it. This type of feedback is what we're looking for. However, it was not in the initial shortlist considerations, but it will be in the considerations as we move forward, because we've spent from Monday to today, not as a committee, but as a commission, researching the internet, researching political donations and so forth. So now we have additional information. So our next step, which will be today when we discuss these candidates, is to fold that into the criteria as well. And then once we select as a commission the 2 or 1 or maybe none of the candidates that we want to interview, then In the interview process, we'll gather more information. And then after that interview process, then we're still going to meet again and discuss the individuals. So the process has just started. So the pro comments and the con comments that we've got, and we've got a considerable number of them, are relevant and they will be considered, but they were not considered as part of the initial committee. So I wanted to make sure that that was understood. So does MC or Richard have any other comments relative to that? Okay. So let me turn it over to.
I have a question. I have a question before we continue.
Sure, Steve.
Who were your top 5? I know who your top 2 are. Who's your top 5?
That depends on the individuals. Here's what happened. Because we never met in the first place, there are 2 of us that used the quantitative process and 1 that did not. It didn't have the resources to do that. So the reason we chose the 2 we did, because they floated up to the top for all 3 of us. Okay. So for example, my top 5, well, I mean, I can sum it up for the 2 of us that quantified it. Would be Pastula, Kerwin, Lancaster, Gray, and Casby. Those were the top 5. But let me go back to what I said before. There's a big separation in numbers between number 3 and 4. And so that's why we did not even consider anybody past number 3. So, but all of us had Pastula and Lancaster right up near the top. MC, go ahead.
I just wanted to acknowledge that, yes, I think it was accurate that we used the resumes and we used their writing samples. And I think it was also, yeah, how they, like there was, so we looked at the detail too, not just of the resume, but in the writing samples and et cetera.
Yeah. So when we still have a big gap, Steve, in the numbers, you know, it's kind of a red flag that, you know, the ones that floated to the top are the ones that, you know, had the more experience and more what we were looking for.
Who was number 3 on your list?
I had Pastula, Kerwin, and Lancaster as the top 3.
And Richard, do I remember correctly that Gray, Monifa Gray was one of the top ones for you too?
Yes,
I remember that
that's
correctly?
the one that you and I both had chose.
Yeah,
okay.
And, yeah, and I guess I would add Gray in as number 4, yeah.
Interesting. Those were my 5.
Oh, really? Well, that's good.
Okay, who's next? MC.
MC's going to talk about Julianne, and I'll talk a little bit about James. Go ahead, MC.
Okay. So I think what Doug did when he's talking about this is I think we recognize as a committee that it's so difficult to qualify and talk about these people who are incredibly qualified and have experience, and we're doing a job that feels almost impossible. So we were trying to quantify to try to create transparency and help you all understand our methodology. And that's the only piece I wanted to add to Doug's. So with regard to Julianne, in particular, one of the reasons I think we wanted to promote her was because the 3 years as general counsel to the Board of Ethics in Detroit, which is, I think, we want a high ethical standard for our staff and them to be hold each other to that high ethical standard. 1 year liaison to the city council, responsible for legal advice and other information. I think this is where it demonstrates an on-demand knowledge of laws that are directly related to those that our commission might require, including Open Meetings Act, VRA, I can't remember, Voting Rights Act, and the Roberts Rules. These may be required while in a Zoom meeting, when we're drawing maps in public, quick, yeah. Redistricting experience. One of the few people who had redistricting experience in the city of Detroit, and Julianne's application was the only one that was able to give an example of the work she did regarding the Voting Rights Act. Others had researched it and were familiar with it, but had not necessarily applied it in a way that she did. litigation experience with city council at many levels, including appellate. This demonstrates an ability to lead a team in defense of our commission maps through our court system at the various levels that we're likely to have to go through. And I think all the candidates, frankly, demonstrated that ability, or many of them. And then this is the writing sample. It was an appropriate choice. That writing sample she was one of 2 candidates who provided writing samples that directly related to our work, showing proficiency with the subject at hand, right? I think, as we all know, like legal, if you're a lawyer, you can have proficiency in a lot of different areas, but we're looking at sort of constitutional state of Michigan and, frankly, constitutional federal and laws that feel really tricky. And so her writing sample directly addressed it. And then her cover letter, just showed that she knew the details of a complex governmental organizational chart. So she addressed the commissioners via the Secretary of State. Small detail. Her application was short, not the longest, but not the shortest. She states she is committed to a public service career and has been with Michigan's largest city as a legal professional for over 17 years, which implies a deeper understanding of the state of Michigan Constitution. We need to clarify that. That could be an assumption. We need to clarify that. Check.
Who's next? Richard? Doug? You're muted, Doug.
Sorry. Hey. Okay, I'm back. I'm going to speak on James Lancaster. We took a look at him. He's got a substantial amount of experience. He's got 20 plus years of experience in our shoes as an appointed commissioner in DeWitt, which we thought was very relevant. It demonstrates an ability to be compassionate with each of us and provide wisdom. He was 2 years as general counsel at MSHDA with private and public employees. We felt that was significant as well. He has no VRA, no Voting Rights Act experience at the federal level. However, he was involved with putting together the constitutional amendment that formed this committee and bringing that forward. So that was significant. His writing sample is directly related to our work as a commission. He was very informative with his history and demonstrates proficiency with the subject. His application was concise and directly addressed the duplicate materials that he submitted for the executive director and general counsel positions. He was responsible to our request to resubmit for the general counsel from his initial application. So we felt his experience that he's demonstrated not only in the public but in the government was significant, because we looked at government experiences as one of the key items. So that was the basis for our decision on James. So
and then,
go ahead, MC.
Doug, I think we also discussed the difference between governmental experience and political experience. And I think ultimately what we're trying to tease out in everything we do as a commission is, right, we're a governmental body and we're trying to be nonpartisan. So I don't know that, right, we want to try to be, I know for me, it's important to clarify when I'm trying to be political versus governmental. And I just wanted to acknowledge that they're not the same, and overly partisan is not something we're looking for, but we do need governmental, in addition to other, not just governmental experience, but we need that in order to understand how we're going to actually move forward as a body who is essentially in the legislative branch of government.
Yeah. So Steve, I think I'd like to open it up. We talk about each of these candidates, and then if additional discussions needed on others, we can do that as well.
Brittany, you want to lead the discussion for us, please?
As always, Rhonda, you're up. I love it.
I love you, Brittany. You make me laugh. You guys are bringing me out of my shell, I must say. First, I want to say I reviewed all of the resumes prior to your meeting, fellas, and I commend you on your meeting. You were very efficient, got right to the point, so I commend the work that you did. I had a couple top picks picked out prior to your meeting too, just from what I read, and actually one of them was Jilliana. Is it Jilliana Julianne. So I do agree with you there. There was another one that I would like to discuss with the committee, but after everybody has time to do their input on the ones you're recommending. With that being said, I did up some notes to keep me on track after your meeting. I did some digging of my own and some notes. So I want you to know that my comments I'm about to make has nothing to do with public comments that we received. And I'm the one that keeps saying public perception, and I know you guys are going to be so tired of hearing that from me. But as I said before, I try to look at everything from all sides. So here's what I've got. I wrote it down so I could stay on track. Let me just go at it. The first thing I worry about with public perception with Mr. Lancaster, the voters, not politicians. We've had people that have worked with them. We've had their executive director contact us. We even had the executive director contact us that one of our executive director candidates was too political. She only contributed to Republicans and she was too political to be considered for that position. So, as we're going, and a lot of their volunteers said the same thing. We need somebody impartial. We need somebody, that doesn't have that politicalness. And when they did their public comments, I noticed that a lot of them said that 2.5 million supporters in Michigan. They have 2.5 million people that voted for this proposition. And yes, they did. And that is a great feat. But Michigan is a state of 10 million people. And during that election, there was over 1.5 million people that voted against it. And upon doing my search on the internet, there are many people that do not trust this commission already, that think that we're going to lean politically. And, some people will have to get over that because we are doing our best. But I personally don't want to do something that is going to make people think even worse, because we're trying to build their trust to really show them that we're trying to be impartial, to get them to give us input. Another thing, and when I bring this up, I mean no disrespect to anybody online or none of our commissioners, but when we were discussing it wasn't really discussed in our meeting, but it was brought up when we were discussing the executive director and Mr. Lancaster for that position. And Steve, you said you know him. I don't know how well you know him, and I'm not saying anything negatively towards you or insinuating anything, but it was brought up that you know him in one of our meetings. So I'm wondering if we go that route too, will it look like we're showing favoritism because somebody, and I understand in your capacity as a lawyer, of course you're going to come across other lawyers, but will it look in public perception like maybe we're showing favoritism if somebody on the commission already knows them? And then lastly, we're supposed to be impartial. And when going through those candidate lists, I think that there were other candidates that might be less controversial and as far as public perception. And I'm sorry, if we don't, give really the meaningful consideration, how are people on sides that might not agree? I hate the whole political arena. I hate the whole Democrat Republican thing. I do, because it's just gotten so way out of hand. But it's the world we live in right now. People aren't very trusting of other sides. Maybe we can bridge that gap. But I want to leave you with a quote from one of our call-in people that called in about our executive director, and something to think about as the commission as a whole. And actually that call-in person was Nancy Wayne, the executive director of Voters Not Politician. And she said regarding our executive director position, quote, "There are right and wrong choices. The right choice will bring voters together. The wrong choice will continue to tear us apart." And seeing the public comment that we got, I am not saying anything about Mr. Lancaster personally. I don't know him. I'm not saying anything about his integrity. I'm not in a position to talk that. I don't know him. I'm just trying to look at it from all sides. Obviously, there's people that are opposed because of the political donations. And I do think we need to take that into consideration because we did it for our executive director position also. So that's all I got. And once everybody comments, I would love to talk about the other person I thought might be good. And thank you. Sorry, I was nervous.
Oh, you're okay, Rhonda. You should feel this should be a safe space where you can express those sorts of opinions. So you are fine. Doug, you have a hand. And then Anthony, I see you too.
I do. Like I said, the recommendation coming out of the committee dealt with just the resumes and the supplemental questions. So after Monday's meeting, I got online and I researched these two candidates, both for what was on the internet and political contributions. And I came up with a list of what I felt were significant political contributions that James had made. And I only looked at 2016, 2018, and 2020 political campaigns. And it raised a red flag to me immediately. And then I got an email the next morning from Tom McMillan, and he had pulled those contributions from probably a different source that I had gotten it from, because this was much more extensive. Maybe he included more additional years, I don't know, but it was really significant, which raised two red flags for me. And then we got a lot of public comments, some pro, some con, and then they were all directed at James' performance and so forth. And I really appreciated those. I read through each one of them, but what it settled in my mind was we went through the same discussion with the executive director with one of the candidates, that she was felt too political and toward one party. So knowing that additional information, I'm not sure I'd even want to move forward with him as an interview. So I don't think it might not be worth our time. So maybe we get some comments from some other people and talk about this, but that comment, but it may be well worth our time just to interview one person, maybe two. I don't know. But we'll get some comments from some of the other folks. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. Anthony, and then MC or, oh, I'm sorry, Rebecca. Sorry, I thought. Anthony.
Hey, everyone. First, I want to just thank Rhonda so much for, really doing the due diligence of considering, all of these points that are very valid, and they are points that we should consider. But I'm kind of going to play devil's advocate here for a second. While I agree, and I kind of said this at the executive director meetings as well, while I agree public perception is important, we should also keep in mind that this person, whoever we hire for any position, they're going to be working for us. They work for the 13 of us. And at the end of the day, they're going to do what we, direct them to do, because us 13 are going to be their boss. And that's just the fact of the matter of how it is. And I also worry about, we're getting these public comments. However, we have not done research on who these public comments are from. And it's like what I said at the last meeting. They could be from a select few partisan individuals that want to, exert their influence on our decision making. And that worries me. It really does. So while I think we definitely should take their opinions into consideration, I also think that we need to find the best person for the job, the person with the most skills that are able to, do the job that we're directing them to do. So I just think that's something we should consider. I also went over all 11 of the applicants, and there were 4 that stuck out to me, the 2 that the committee chose, and then another 2. So after we're done having this discussion, I know Rhonda had another person to add. And then I might also have a fourth person to add. I don't know if we want to interview 5 like how we did before. Steve, I heard you mention earlier about 5. So that's something we could discuss. But as far as this political discussion goes, that'd be a question I'd love to ask, Mr. Lancaster, and see how he responds to the question, how he feels about these public comments, if they feel like it might be detrimental to his job or his ability to perform the job. And that's just my opinion on the matter.
Thank you, Anthony. Rebecca, did you still want to share?
Yeah, of course I'm going to say something because I'm a lawyer and this is dealing with lawyers. So I have a whole bunch of thoughts. So I actually wrote them down because I want to make sure I get everything out here. So the first thing is I'm surprised by how light the bench is. And by that, I mean the people who applied, we didn't have a ton of people applied, and there was a dearth of what I consider true qualifications for this position and who we applied. So we're looking at a pretty light bench, which is unfortunate. And I think that sort of colors some of my thought process on this. I'm sure some of you remember from with discussion of AMNA, and when we originally talked about James applying for the executive director position, one of the first comments I made was, well, why isn't he applying for the general counsel? And my thinking on that is because, in my opinion, being a lawyer myself, the role of an attorney is quite a bit different than executive director. When you're dealing with executive director, you're having someone who has a lot of discretion. When you're dealing with an attorney has ethical obligations under Michigan law and under our admission to the bar with respect to the advice that we give. And we're not there to give our personal opinion of what we think should happen. We're there to give legal advice about what the law is and what it requires, just like we've seen here with the attorneys advising us. So to me, there's a constraint on James in terms of his role as an attorney that there would not have been if he was an executive director. And that was precisely what my concern was with him in the executive director role. So I think it's a little different when you're looking at someone who's an attorney because you have that constraint. In terms of the political contributions, I looked at those too, like I have for every other candidate. And I have one comment on that with respect to judicial, because he has a litigation background and I also have a litigation background. And I can tell you that when you are an attorney representing clients in front of a judge who's up for election, you donate to his campaign or her campaign, period. It is expected. So I don't think that's uncommon for someone who has a litigation background to have $100 checks going to this judge and that judge, because it really is an expectation when you're a litigator. You're going to donate to the campaign of the judge you're standing in front of because you don't want it to hurt your client if you don't. So to me, like, I just kind of threw those all out as a wash. However, that being said, there were numerous other contributions, primarily to Democrats. I don't think I saw any Republicans. I mean, but it was a very long list, so it might have been. So that's kind of my point on that. One of the points of analysis I used with AMNA is, and I'm sure you guys remember this too, is that when you have someone who's generating so much controversy, if you have other qualified candidates, why would you consider continuing with that person? I think with James, it's a little different because we don't really have a deep bench there. And honestly, he is the most qualified in terms of years of experience, in terms of constitutional experience, in terms of government experience. And so I would hate to dismiss him outright without at least an interview because of that fact. It's not like we have 20 other people who we can go look to fill that interview gap. You're dealing with someone with 35 years experience practicing law versus someone with 6. That's a big difference. So, and then the last thing is I read through all of the commentary from the public, and I take it seriously, and I think we all need to take it seriously. I think we need to think about it and push him hard on it in an interview. But the takeaway I took from that is there is a lot of concern about his alignment with the Democratic Party, and I think that is valid and an appropriate line of inquiry. However, when you look at the work that he actually did for Voters Not Politicians and what he drafted and what it looks like, and the fact that it is very neutral, it is not slanted towards one party or another, and the fact that it has actually gone through judicial scrutiny and been scrutinized by multiple judges and been upheld as being neutral and independent, to me is an indicator that the Democratic background is not impacting the legal advice that he is giving, and that he is capable of being independent, as I would expect him to be as an attorney. So that's my very lengthy thought, James.
Oh, Rebecca, that was extremely thoughtful. I agree and disagree in some areas, but Cynthia and then Aaron.
So I just wanted to, I really appreciate what Rebecca and what everyone has said. I'm glad that the public is interacting with us and giving us their thoughts. That's valuable to us, but I do not want us to be, I don't know the word, I don't, unduly swayed either way by the people that choose to interact with us. There's lots of people that differently that haven't interacted with us. So I think we do need to take the information that's given to us and really look into it and think about it, but not let the public determine the decisions that we make. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Cynthia. Aaron.
I was just going to say, as one of the Republicans on the commission, I was really impressed with Mr. Lancaster's resume. And if you're going to look at my political contributions, I can tell you up front, I have not given anything to the Democratic Party. I just haven't. And I think you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody that, well, may have given to both, but I just don't want us to turn down someone with such an exemplary resume due to political contributions when I don't think in his role as general counsel, he would give us, lead us wrong. That's all I want to say. Thank you to all the public comments that have come in, but I think we really need to not turn away great experience just because of their political contributions. I think they can keep it separate, and if they can't, that ought to come out in an interview.
I'm just gonna say very quickly some thoughts that I have. I think so I think we have to be a little bit more decisive because, and this could be my personal opinion, I think, and we know that we're live and folks are always watching, but it seems like we wax and wane depending on the situation. If I were outside looking in terms of, we made this, we're attempting to kind of think about or reconsider this for this candidate when we had a staunch stance when it came to the executive director. So if we're thinking about how we're publicly being perceived and if we're a strong commission, I think that balance has to be constantly considered. And right now it seems that you are making, and the you is not directed towards anybody. So I'll say that we are making a consideration that was not happening initially for another candidate. And that I have a problem with, honestly, because I think a part of our job is to be fair and to be a beacon of light in a different way. So while you may want to interview, I go back and I remember that conversation. We amended the questions to address political affiliation, to address contribution. And now it seems like we're saying, well, it's not that important. I think integrity has to be important for the commission and for the candidates. And to Anthony's point, we cannot assume, because humans are not robots, that just because they're working under us, that they are going to do whatever we say because this is a job. And I would hate for us to get in a situation, this is a blanket statement for any of the candidates that we hire, where it ends up not looking good, that we have to now have a conversation of something else. And that's kind of where I stand. I think we need to pick one way or the other and stick to it. Because I think we as a commission, sometimes we don't trust, and I listen, and there's a lot of we spend a lot of time making decisions and hemming and hawing over things when I think we have the ability to be more concise. And I think someone had a hand before, MC, but then he went away. So I see Rebecca's hand and someone else. Doug took himself off mute. So I don't know who was first.
Go ahead, Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we didn't deny people interviews based on politics in the past. So
right.
We already had that information about AMNA and some of the comments before the last, and it was discussed, but we didn't deny her an interview based on it. And I mean, if we're structuring this towards, we shouldn't even interview James Lancaster, I don't think that's being consistent. I really don't. I think we should go through with the interview of who was recommended and, press him on these questions like we did AMNA.
Yeah, so that part is fine, interview him, but then I still caution us, there were some other comments made in the commission of, then if we're interviewing him, then we should also not completely consider this wealth of information we have. So at this point, I mean, as we've discussed before, when we get resumes, it's really important that a part of this process is transparency. So people are going to send us things. People are definitely going to send us more things after this meeting today, for sure. So we have to weigh all of that, and we can't pick and choose when one goes into the shadow. That's all I was trying to articulate. Rhonda, I'm sorry, Doug, and then Rhonda.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think we need consistency on the approach that we take, as you mentioned, Brittany. And then I support what Rebecca said. I mean, we knew certain things about AMNA and because of public comments and so forth. And very similar situation as James, but we did move forward and interview her, and we got her opinions on it, and she was honest about those. So I think I made the comment before, I would hesitate whether we should even interview him. I think we should treat him like we treated AMNA as we move forward.
Okay, MC still wanted to speak. I just couldn't see him. So MC, go ahead, and then Rhonda.
Thanks. This is MC. I had to take my video off because my internet is unstable and I didn't want to lose connection with y'all. So it's mostly about the potential to balance a team out with our executive director. I just wanted to offer that one of the reasons that our small committee had suggested we have 45 minutes to an hour was because we don't have an executive director in-house yet. We have chosen one, I think the idea is that we want to consider our team. And that's the last piece. I just wanted to suggest that we want to make sure that we have this sort of expertise. If our executive director doesn't have that sort of legal background that we need, there's a cost benefit, right? And I think that's what we're each speaking to, is that we may have to make a super hard choice in order to get the expertise we need, but it's not clear. Check.
Thank you, MC. Rhonda?
Okay, I just want to go back to the point real quick that they were making about AMNA in her interview. Yes, we did interview AMNA, but if you all remember, those comments came in prior to her interview. So she was already scheduled for the interview when those comments came in. So it's a little bit different scenario, I think. I mean, obviously, whatever the group decides, I mean, I have my feelings. I've displayed them, but as far as the AMNA goes, because we're saying we still honored her with an interview, in order not to for the public comment, we would have had to call her and say, we no longer want to interview, because she was already scheduled before we received those. I believe we received them like the day before her interview. So, I mean, it was already scheduled, and I just want to make that point.
Thank you, Rhonda. Anthony and then Steve.
Rhonda, I'd love to hear about the other candidate that you singled out.
Are we done talking about Mr. Lancaster?
I was just going to say, Steve had his hand up. So before we go there, yes, by all means.
Well, yeah, I know Mr. Lancaster. I know him on a first name basis. I imagine that there may be other people that come before this committee that other people may know, and if we're going to disqualify anybody because one of us knows them, then I think we're going down a wrong path. If there's something that, some reason that I know that he shouldn't be considered, I would certainly let you know that. There isn't. So his knowing me and me knowing him is of no qualifications or concern. I guess on Rebecca's comment that the bench isn't very deep. If we want to get a deep bench, then maybe we ought to consider $300,000-$400,000 of the salary, because those are the types of salaries that are going to draw people in that do this stuff on a day-to-day basis, and we're not going to pay that. So I looked at these resumes, and could they be better? Sure, they could be better. But I thought that the people had overall had the qualifications for us to at least interview them. And so that was those were my two comments. We move on from there.
Go ahead, Rhonda.
Steve, I just want to say too, I meant no disrespect to you. I was not trying.
None taken.
I just want to make that perfectly clear that I meant no disrespect to you or was not trying to insinuate. I was purely speaking, looking at as a public perception thing and not saying anything about your integrity or Mr. Lancaster. So I just want to make sure. I know I said that before, but I do want to stress that to you.
Well, my point is that just because one of us knows somebody is not a disqualification of that person. That's my point. You'd have to go a long way to hurt my feelings.
No, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I just wanted you to know that I was not being disrespectful, and I meant no disrespect by that comment. Okay, maybe for my benefit then.
Other thoughts on Mr. Lancaster? Or we kind of talk about other candidates? Okay, well, I think Anthony, spearheaded the conversation of discussing other folks that we may have had in mind. So, Rhonda, would you like to share to start the conversation off about who else you were thinking about or considering?
Sure. My second pick when I went through them was Clinton Hubble. And I did up a quick little sheet with notes on why I thought he would be good. Obviously, I'm not an attorney. So, as far as experience goes, there may be some stuff, obviously, the attorneys are going to know better. But what I put on here, his objective, I liked his statement that the Michigan citizens have the right to determine their own future, and he believes in the constitutional mission of our commission. His educational accomplishments was the moot court board.
Rhonda, if you can hear us, you disappeared. We'll come back to you when you come back. Does anybody else have?
Rhonda, you're showing up as being on mute on my screen, so maybe turn your mute off.
The whole thing just crashed. Can you hear me?
We can now.
Okay.
Start over.
I'll do this. Okay, I'll do this quick in case it happens again. That was weird. His educational accomplishments, he had the moot court board of advocates, Order of Barristers, I probably said that wrong, and national champion on civil rights. I looked up the moot court for those like me that don't know anything about lawyers. And the Moot Court Board of Advocates is a student organization that provides hands-on lawyering experience and further refines members' communication and advocacy skills by exposing them to simulated appellate court experiences. Moot Court is led by an executive board and faculty advisors. Membership is competitive, and students selected for the program complete an advocacy course and complete internal and national competitions. I am so nervous. I don't know why. The Order of Barristers is an honor society for United States law school graduates. Membership in the order is limited to graduating law students and practicing lawyers who demonstrate exceptional skill in trial advocacy, oral advocacy, and brief writing. So finding out what those were was impressive, especially with the writing aspect in the trial. He has argued in federal and state court, and he has argued constitutional cases at the Michigan Supreme Court, if I read this right, which Constitution, there we go. He does pro bono work for people that have adversary court bankruptcies. So, you know, the fact that he does pro bono work, I thought that was a good thing. Awards and recognition, Pro Bono Circle of Excellence by the State Bar of Michigan, the national champion of the McGee Civil Rights Moot Court Competition. His cover letter talks about the values instilled in him from his parents to always keep a fair mind, be careful and study, and to be zealous about giving voice to people who cannot always speak for themselves. He started his own law firm right out of law school in a time when we were in a recession, and I know how bad that was because I was working 2 jobs besides my real estate job. So that shows me ambition to be able to open and function your own business in that type of economy. I'm sorry, I blanked out. Shows me that he does have initiative. He has represented vast variety of clients from different organizations, religious groups, economic backgrounds, trustees, directors. So he's got a wide slew of experience arguing different things. And he has represented clients in agency in all levels of state and federal court, including the Michigan Supreme Court, which, if we do get sued, it could end up going to the Michigan Supreme Court. So to have somebody that has argued in front of the Supreme Court and argued a constitutional case, obviously not this particular amendment, but has argued constitutional cases in front of the Supreme Court, I think would be a good thing. And although his writing sample was basically a whole court case, it looks like, I found it was very long, but I found it to be quite interesting for the parts that I could understand because I'm not a lawyer. So there's some that I didn't understand, I'll say. But I think it shows that he has a good concept of federal and state constitution. And I would expect any lawyer to have an understanding. I would assume that's part of your schooling, is to know the Constitution. Maybe I'm assuming wrong, but he's exhibited that he does know. And if it's not part of your training, it probably should be. I don't know. But anyways, with that said, you know, I would ask that the committee maybe consider him. Like I said, we've got 2 lawyers, so they would know better than me. If, you know, if you reviewed his, you would know better than me how good he is. But that's my opinion, and that's who I was thinking.
Thank you, Rhonda. You were close. It's barristers. You got it. I think I think I saw Juanita, and then Rebecca took herself off mute early on, and then Doug. Don't be mad if I got the order wrong. We're a nice bunch. And then Anthony, you all are fine. Just hash it out however you want to.
Well, I enjoyed Rhonda. I thought I was kind of really in agreement with her because Clinton Hubble was one of my choices. And I thoroughly looked at his record and his accomplishments and his experience. And I winded up looking up moot court and barrister and all of that. And I was really wondering why he was not on the list for candidates to be interviewed. But he was my choice. I'm not going to hold it long because Rhonda said everything almost I want to say. But I really gave him a hands up, and the other guy, kind of okay. That's it. Did you all hear me?
Yes, Juanita, we heard you. Rebecca? Can't hear you, Rebecca.
Okay, I'm ready. So He's a litigator. That's the gist of my comment is he's a litigator. He's a very experienced litigator. He does civil and criminal litigation, which is not the same as constitutional law. Litigation is very different from doing either corporate or government law, where you're analyzing statutes and you're advising clients and you're giving them advice, which is really more what we need at this point. We need someone who has that advisory experience, not someone who has litigation experience. You know, if we needed a litigator at some point in the future, we can always farm that work out to the extent we aren't comfortable with who we pick for the general counsel position. But from my perspective, general counsel is someone who's more of an advisory role, not a litigator, not someone who's going in to fight our legal battles at this point. We want someone who's going to give us sound legal advice based on experience, looking at the law, looking at statutes, looking at regulations, and advising us of what we're supposed to do and what we should be doing, not someone who tries cases. They're just to me, it's the difference between going to, you know, a proctologist versus an obstetrician. I mean, you do specialize in law, and the longer you're in law, the more specialized you are. So someone who has that extensive litigation background, to me, unless they're specifically trying constitutional cases, which he is not, to me, the skills just aren't transferable.
Doug, and then Anthony, and then Richard.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with what Rebecca just said. And I'm taking a look at his supplemental questions. And one of the things, the question regarding working in the public sector or Michigan state government, he said, I'm an outsider with respect to state government. You're right, he's a litigator. So he doesn't bring forward the government experience that we're looking for, and in my opinion as well. So just thought I'd chime in on that.
Anthony, and then Richard.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so like I said, I went through them all as well, and I appreciate the work that the subcommittee did, because I came up with the same two people that they came up with. But then I also thought that Matthew Casby's stood out to me a little bit. Not as much as the other two candidates that they already identified, but I read his publication that was submitted to the publication, that was submitted to the Michigan Association of Clerks back in June 2020. And I thought it was an interesting read. Yeah, that's what I'm no legal expert by any means. So I kind of put a little less weight on my personal opinion than I do on some of the lawyers on this commission. But yeah, I think next what we got to do is decide, how many people we want to bring in for interview.
Richard, go ahead, and
I'm
then
just gonna wait.
Juanita.
I didn't want to jump in.
Oh,
Just
no.
a little comment to Juanita. I did have him on my list. But as Rebecca just said, she made quite a bit of sense on her comments about him. So maybe that's why you didn't get a little farther. I don't know. That's all I have. Thank you.
And I just want to say that I respect all of the lawyers that's on our commission, and I'm going to heed to what they're saying. I believe that they know best when it comes to the attorneys that we select.
Steve, go ahead. Thank you, Juanita, and then Doug, you're next after Steve.
I looked at Mr. Hubble, and quite frankly, other than he's a lawyer, he doesn't qualify for our position. He has no experience in the areas that we're looking for, which is voter rights. And as Rebecca said, he's a litigator. I was a litigator my whole career. And not to disparage you, Rhonda, but all of the things that you liked about him was in law school and means nothing once you get out of law school. So I mean, if he'd have done that type of thing after he got out of law school and had that type of experience, that would have been good. But in law school, you sign up and you go do it, and that's about it. So I just don't think he's qualified for the position. Thank you.
Go ahead, Steve. I mean, go ahead, Doug.
I just had to make sure I was off mute. You know, given, unless we have further conversation, I'd just like to put a motion forward that we bring 2 candidates in for interview, and that's the 2 that were recommended by the committee, which would be Julianne Pastula and James Lancaster.
Is there a second to Doug's motion?
I will second it.
Okay, is there any discussion regarding bringing in Mr. Lancaster and Ms. Pastula only? Anthony.
So I should first say that I agree with this motion, but we might want to think about having more than just 2 people interview, since we had 5 interview for the last position. Not saying that we need 5, but if there's another candidate that any of us feel strongly about, I don't think going, to 3 or 4, I don't think that would hurt anything.
Doug.
I think one of the things we got to look at, Anthony, is that we didn't have the source pool that you had in the executive director and they had in this communications director. You had 40 people. You brought in 6, that's 15%. We had 11, we bring in 2, that's 18%. So really we're bringing in a bigger percentage than what you said. And we're short, I think we're short on experience with a lot of these people. So that's why we wanted to choose 2 and bring 2 forward and spend a lot more time with them. And we felt these were the 2 best qualified. MC.
I want to acknowledge too that it's back to the team piece, that I think we may want to, if we're able to bring our executive director into these interviews, right? I think it was mentioned that we as the commission are hiring this general counsel person, but I think if we look at the organizational chart, it will be the executive director who will be the boss, right? That we delegate authority to, and then the executive director is essentially the general counsel's boss. They work for us, they're independent, but I just wanted to acknowledge that it feels like it's an important piece, and I don't think that's the only reason we should keep it shorter. But I think that the time for us, we're making a hard decision here. We know this. We're going to have to deliberate. We're going to have to try to convince each other, and we're going to have to make nuanced, like there's fine points here. It's tricky. I don't think that I guess what I'm suggesting is the time to deliberate and the time to bring in a person that we don't know yet, who might complement this general counsel, meaning the executive director and frankly, the communications person, right? We're building a team, and I think we want to leave time for us to understand it and ask questions, maybe 3 or 4 more questions based on the personality of the communications director, the personality of the guy, right? I can't anticipate it all, but my hunch is that we're going to want more time for each candidate, and I'll just leave it at that.
Rhonda?
I would be open to 3 if there's somebody else that as a whole people think would be qualified, just so we're not so limited. Because if they don't look completely good on paper, that doesn't mean that once they're, interviewed that you might see something with them. So if there was another one that ranked high that everybody would agree with, I would like to look at least 3, just to give us a little more option.
Anybody else? I've got a couple of comments, but want everybody to have a chance before me. I think limiting us to two when we had a top five, and I'm not saying top five because their top five, you guys' top five happen to agree with mine. But for a couple of reasons. Number one, we know Lancaster's going to be a lightning rod. He already is. He's going to remain that. So I would, and I think interviewing two people, which I consider the interview to be the key. To get somebody in here and talk to them face to face, or as face to face as we can have on Zoom, will be key in picking whoever we want for general counsel. I don't think I'm speaking out of school when I say that in a general counsel position, how that person comes across is going to be important in our decision making. We want to make sure that they're comfortable in public speaking. We want to make sure that they can form thoughts on the fly, not just typing them out, and so forth. So I would think, Rhonda wants 3. I really want 4. I don't know that we need 5, but I think that there are a couple more out of the 3 that weren't picked that we should get. Lastly, we're not under that huge of a time crunch right now. We've got time. We're going to meet tomorrow with another seminar. We've got the 10th coming up, and I don't know what Sally's got scheduled for us on the 10th other than continue with choosing these communications and general counsel. So, excuse me, we've got time to do this. And I don't want us to short ourselves. Richard.
Just a quick thought here. I just went through the notes I had made when we had our thing, and I believe MC had picked Monifa Gray and Delicia Morrison, and Doug had picked Catherine Kerwin. And that's the one that I had also liked, but then the other 2 had those picked. So maybe out of that group of 6, if you narrow it down, but then if you go all of them, that's 6 people. Then. So I don't know if that's.
Yeah. Rhonda, then Rhonda.
Since you and Rebecca are both attorneys, your input is very vital in this. So I would like to know, Steve, you said you had a few picks in mind yourself. I would like to know who your picks are, since you do have many years of experience being an attorney, and same thing with Rebecca has experience. So if she had some other picks besides the 2 that were mentioned, I would like to hear them from both of you.
Go ahead, Rebecca. I already had my top 5.
Yeah, I mean, this was a hard choice for me because I believe it was Doug was saying when you rank these people, it's like there's 2 and then there's like a huge gap. So, I think in terms of, I looked at Catherine, my concern there again was her work is in litigation. She does collections work. It's not really related to, interpretation of voting rights and constitutional law. I'm not opposed to interviewing her. I maybe she's going to dazzle us during the interview, but that was my concern there. I looked at Donard, I believe is the name, Donard Haggins. He is actually in Illinois, but he has some fairly decent, public body experience that I thought he was an interesting candidate. Again, young, 2014 grad. And then the third person I kind of had like in my top 5 was Troy Portis. Again, a 2013 grad, works with Detroit Water and City since 2016. So not a ton of experience, but a little bit more, municipal kind of government experience than some of the other people. So those were kind of the 5 that I narrowed in on as possibly being people we might want to interview. But I agree with the committee that James and Julianne were the clear top 2 out of what we had.
Well, to answer your question, out of the ones that have been talked about with Richard and everybody, Catherine and Monifa would be my other 2 that I would go with for interviews. Doug, do you have your hand up?
No, I just want to reemphasize what we had said before, that, we got two tiers of people. We got a couple people that are really qualified, and we wanted to, excuse me, invest our time and spend extra time with those two, because we felt they're going to float to the top anyways. I'm going to look at it from a quantitative standpoint, and I'll list the top four, which were Pastula, Lancaster, Kerwin, not in this order necessarily, and Gray. Those ended up to be the top four quantitatively that we looked at. Now, I can't speak to litigation off the top of my head right now about litigation experience or consultation experience and advice like Rebecca can. So.
Do we want? Yeah, I was going to say, do we want to move to interview those four then? Is that kind of the thought process rather than just?
We have a motion on the floor now to limit it to two.
Yeah. I mean, the committee.
You can make an amendment if you want, Rebecca.
I'm not particularly invested one way or another, so.
How about we vote then and see,
Motion on the floor is to interview Pastula in Lancaster.
Before we do that, Steve, can we get MC's opinion on this?
MC, you have an opinion? Of course you do.
I'm okay. What Rebecca said is, I think two. It's been said. I'm okay with moving forward on the motion.
All right. I'm going to take a roll call. Sally.
Hello, commissioners. Please just give me one moment to pull up a list so I don't skip anyone. I'll do it alphabetical order by first name, just like our introductory roll call. And if you could please just say yes in favor of the motion or no, not in favor of the motion when I call your name, that'd be great. Anthony Eade.
Nay.
Brittany Kellum.
No.
Cynthia Orton.
No.
Doug Clark.
Yes.
Dustin is absent. Aaron Wagner.
No.
Janice Villette.
Yes.
Juanita Curry. Oh, you're muted, Juanita. I'll come back to you in a second. MC Rothorn.
Yes.
Juanita, I'll wait to look and see if you're unmuted, and then I'll call on you once you are. Rebecca Satella.
Yes.
Rhonda Lang.
No.
Richard Weiss.
No.
Juanita Curry.
Yes.
And Steve Lett.
No. Motion fails. I would move that we would interview Lancaster, Pastula, Kerwin, and Gray.
Second.
Rhonda had a question. No? Okay.
Okay. I think we've kind of discussed pros and cons, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll do another roll call. Yeah, Doug.
Yeah, just one comment. Yeah, those quantitatively, those are the four that floated to the top.
Right.
Yep.
I think everybody was kind of good with those.
Yep.
We'll do another roll call, please, Sally.
Thanks for your patience. I have to get the right document up. All right. Same thing. This time I'll go with the last person first. So Steve Lett.
Yes.
Richard Weiss.
Yes.
Rhonda Lang.
No.
Rebecca Zatella.
Yes.
MC Rothorn.
Yes.
Juanita Curry.
Yes.
Janice Villette.
Yes.
Aaron Wagner.
Yes.
Doug Clark,
Yes.
Cynthia Orton,
Yes.
Brittany Kellum,
I abstain.
Anthony Ede,
Yes.
It
motion
passes.
passes.
Okay, Sally, when are we going to be able to start scheduling interviews?
So we did reach out to all of the candidates for general counsel earlier this week in anticipation that you all might make a decision today to see if they were available tomorrow afternoon. So folks were. So we could schedule those interviews for tomorrow afternoon. The meeting can only go from 1 until 5. We have a hard stop at 5 tomorrow. So with the webinar presentation, which will be about an hour, that would leave about 2 hours to do the candidate interviews, and then 15 to 20 minutes to discuss the questions for the candidates and agree on those. Hopefully it won't take as long as the executive director, because you all kind of had previously thought about you've already engaged in that conversation before, I should say, about how to make those questions. And then that would only leave you about a half an hour for discussion and next steps. But again, similar to the executive director conversation, you don't have to make a decision on the same day. So that would allow you time to have half an hour interviews for each of those 4 candidates. That's one option. That's the best I can do with the time that you have tomorrow. If you would prefer to wait until next week to interview folks, we can maybe see if we can have a little bit more time for the actual interviews themselves, and then could spend the time tomorrow discussing the communications and outreach director positions instead.
Well, I think the kind of the feeling of the group is we want to have more time to interview these people. Is that kind of the general feeling? Nodding of the head up and down would give me some kind of, okay. We're at almost at the end of the day, though we can go till 4:30, but I guess what my suggestion would be is to spend more time tomorrow on the communications person, and then next week schedule more time for the 4 interviews. That I think accomplishes what I've heard people say today we would like to accomplish. Is there any thoughts? Juanita, you got your hand up?
Yes, I have my hand up. I made a mistake in our last, this has nothing to do with what we talked about mostly today, but I would like to amend my names because I did make a mistake with the Communications Outreach Committee with the names, and I want to correct it. So any of you that wanted to go over some of those names, you could.
I guess I've lost you. What are you telling us?
In our last, I think it was yesterday when we had a meeting, I named some people that we had put up to interview or to select from. And right. I miscalculated some of those names. I want to correct the names. We have 8, but I want to correct them. Can I just run the names off?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, great. We have for our short list, we have Michael Crow, Edward Woods, and Brenda Kerfoot, Sonia Howell, Janet Lipson, Andrea Taylor, Amy Hybel, and Bill Froelich.
Yeah, those were the ones that were reported in the minutes. Yeah.
Yes.
Those are all the same.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then tomorrow we have the seminar. Sally, is that going to start? Is that first on the list with all our usual stuff? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
And then we'll talk about the communications. So the committee for communications will be ready for us tomorrow. And then we meet next week on the 10th. And do we have anything particular scheduled on that day, Sally?
We can do the general counsel interviews on that day. And I think I'll look, Sarah and I will make sure that there's availability for translators and others, but right now it's only set aside to be 3 hours long. I think we'll probably have to make that 3.5 or 4 hours. And then maybe each of your 4 candidates would have 45 minutes instead of a half an hour.
Okay. Well, I mean, we also have the option to bring somebody back, so no, we don't have to. I think what we found out in interviewing the ED positions, that some of them took a little longer and some of them didn't take so long. I assume this will be the same. MC.
I think Doug has drafted a draft list of questions. I can't remember if it's been sent out to everybody, but I'm asking whether we should sort of look at that or potentially look at that to help us for the 10th. Look at that tomorrow. I'm not sure.
I would recommend that you all, that's why I was suggesting that we schedule more time for next week, Thursday, so that the candidates themselves don't have a week to prepare their answers to your potential questions.
Okay.
We will make them publicly available, of course, prior to the meeting, as we do with all your documents for the various meetings. But similar to the executive director position, that's what I might recommend.
Do you always disparage lawyers like that? Doug.
Yeah, I had the same comment that Sally did, because I had originally sent that to Sally to have it distributed. And then second thoughts were, well, boy, it's going to be public and everybody's going to sit there and self-prepare their answers. So,
well, we could send that one out and then come up with a second list and ask them.
Yeah. Yeah, we could do that.
Now, we'll discuss it next, the 10th.
Yeah, we do it probably just before we interview them, I would guess. So I think Richard and MC have seen it because we kept it within the committee. So.
Okay.
All right.
Anybody else? Anything else for the good of the group? If not, I would enter Cynthia.
I just had a thought. So I really appreciated the information that the California Commission gave to us, what they wrote up for the commission that would follow them, of things that they learned that worked or didn't work. And I was just thinking about that the other day, that maybe we should consider, some of us at least, taking notes along the way, because I'm afraid we'll forget some of these setup things by the time we get done with our real work, and we will forget to put those things in that might be helpful to the next commission trying to set up.
So you're volunteering to take complete notes?
No, I think we should all take our own notes and just things if we see, oh, we could have done that better, because I've already recognized things that, oh, we should have set this up beforehand, or, we could have done this a little bit better.
Sure.
We're all, new to this, so hopefully they won't have to start from ground zero.
Well, I'm up to page 34 on my notes, so. Okay. I move we adjourn. Is there a second? There's a second. All in favor, turn your computer off. Bye. See you tomorrow.
Take care. Have a nice afternoon.
Bye, everyone.